Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 46 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. It's me, as always, from the west coast of Canada, Trevor Dame, and also, as always, it's from the east coast of the United States of America. It's Matt Feuerstein. Matt, we're back for like the third time in a month. Many podcasts would call that par for the course. For us, it's an absolutely amazing undertaking.
I mean, a lot of these podcasts that review like shows and DVDs, they literally do it once every week. So we are still behind the curve when it comes to that stuff. So I think that everybody should hate us. So hopefully they do.
Exactly. Even when we're doing more, we find ways to be negative about ourselves.
Exactly. And on the other hand, I was reading an article today about how they're studying whether or not coronavirus could be spread by farts. All I'll say is everybody stay the F away from me.
Finally, your weekly Googling of fecal oral contamination finally pays off.
Well, you don't know how close to true that is.
But something else that will pay off for every listener will be listening to some of the other great podcasts on the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network. And I always like to plug a different show each episode. This time I'm going to plug the same show I plugged last time because you know what? If you have me on your show, you get an extra plug. I'm going to plug Who's Next. Well, really I'm plugging it the second time basically because unlike the last time we plugged the show, my first episode is actually out. So Who's Next is Stephen Graham's new podcast about Bill Goldberg's career. It's going over his career match by match from the beginning, like some other podcast. And I'm on an episode that's already out covering Goldberg versus Wrath, and I'm on another three matches. I mean, the next three episodes, which are each covers a match. So I remember having a lot of fun. They're shorter podcasts. I believe this first one is in the under 40 minutes, and I think we recorded 4 in a little over 90 minutes, so the rest should be even shorter. I remember having fun. I remember talking about Goldberg about only half of the time. I also remember I got pretty deep about what Goldberg meant to like as a Jewish sports hero, which I have to admit, Matt, I felt completely guilty because I was like, I'm not Jewish at all, and I do a podcast with someone who's far more eloquent and actually is Jewish, who could probably speak to this topic far better than I ever could. But I try my best.
All right, so let's get into it. Goldberg, Jewish sports hero. Let's do it. No, just kidding. I plan on listening to this podcast while we're recording this so I can get a cool Trevor Dame voice doubling effect going on.
Oh, God. That's 2 more Trevor Dames than anybody needs.
Only half as much as I need.
The first few episodes of Through the Years, I would listen back to parts of it just to see how it sounded and to pick up like things I was doing wrong. But I haven't listened to anything I've done probably in 2 years. Like I can't listen to myself. I just can't. So even like the Who's Next, I thought, I should listen to this to see how Steven edited it and to see, you know, what specifically made it into the first episode so I can plug something specifically. And I was just like, nope, I can't subject myself to myself.
Well, I will be subjected to you so you don't have to because I love listening to anything involving Trevor Dame, and This one is high on my list.
Well, I do remember having a lot of fun. So, and I have no good transition next, but we actually have for once, the last few Ring of Honor shows were very close together, and so we didn't really have any news that happened between the shows, which I usually like to start off the show after the plugs with before we get to the show review. This time we just have a couple tidbits. It's not much, but a couple things I found from The Observer at the time. I'll just read. IWA, the Puerto Rico IWA, not the Japanese deathmatch one, not IWA Mid-South, the U.S. Indie. IWA this past weekend ran what was called the Ring of Honor Invasion with Homicide, B.J. Whitmer, and Dan Mothin, although all only worked mid-card matches. On July 30th in Coamo, I want to just preempt this by saying I apologize to anyone listening, especially if you live in Puerto Rico, because I am likely going to butcher some of these city names. But anyway, in Coamo, before 500, Homicide and Bad Boy Bradley, who is Jeff Bradley from Florida, lost to Ricky Banderas and New Jack. Chicano and Slash Venom, aka Flash Flanagan, drew Dan Moff and BJ Whitmer. On July 31st in Yaco, before 1,000 people, Chicano and Venom beat Homicide and Whitmer, and Banderas beat Homicide, said to have been a great match.
Whenever like I read a result that somebody drew someone, I'm always like, for a split second, I'm like, is that like an angle? Like they drew them and they didn't like the picture, so they got into a fight, like something like that. But now I realize it's just they went to a draw.
I'm always imagining just them getting drawn just like Kate Winslet in Titanic. Like,
ooh, even better.
Dude Jack going, draw me like your French girl's Homicide. But I just thought this was a little interesting just because, it's only 2004, yet, people in Puerto Rico felt like this is worthy of branding these shows Ring of Honor Invasion and bringing some guys in, which it's kind of interesting to see who this early people kind of thinking, like when JAPW and Ring of Honor run a co-promote show, that's not a surprise. But this was rereading this through the newsletters was a bit of a surprise that already in mid 2004, granted they only brought through three guys. It was also kind of interesting because I always think back to when I think Homicide from this era, how so many people, like there was people back then, they would write Homicide off and say, oh, he's just a New Jack clone, without realizing like Homicide's the furthest thing from that. You clearly haven't watched the match. So it's interesting. It kind of blew my mind to imagine like Homicide and New Jack actually facing each other in a tag match in 2004. Like I don't know if this made tape or anything, probably not. But actually, I'm sure there's probably Homicide New Jack matches that did make it because there's everything out there. But this was the first time I really thought, oh, this actually happened. Like Homicide actually wrestled New Jack somewhere.
Yeah, I bet it. I wonder if that was the only time too, because you're right. They did have that sort of connection, I guess, just because they were both had like kind of like gangster type vibes. Like
just dark-skinned people whose gimmick is they're kind of streetwise and wearing do-rags at some points. And Homicide was a guy who would wrestle. He had no qualms about wrestling in a more garbagey match with some plunder, but Homicide would also wrestle basically, as we've discussed through the years, like Homicide was probably the most versatile indie wrestler of his generation. Like he would wrestle basically every type of match.
Yeah, and so we're sort of saying that a part of the reason they were put together like that is a little bit of racism and mixed with a little bit of like their kind of like the way they presented themselves in terms of like street toughness.
Yeah, and I don't think that kind of stuff would happen now because I think people. I mean, I guess it would, but it doesn't seem like it's as prevalent now as it would be, at least in the wrestling circles. Maybe in other circles, stereotyping is maybe more prevalent than ever. But like Twitter online wrestling would be more cognizant of making problematic comparisons. Yeah.
You'd think. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit.
Hopefully we don't have to put them to the test. But the other little note, this is actually more about an older show, but it came out when I was looking through old Ring of Honor newswires for this show. And it's from a July 27th, 2004 Ring of Honor newswire. This is just one of those funny little Ring of Honor jokes. CNBC has sent word to the Ring of Honor offices that Baron von Raschke will never be hired as a financial analyst for goose-stepping in the ring last Friday. So this is referencing at Death Before Dishonor 2, Part 1, where the show opened with Baron von Raschke coming out and goose-stepping to a big pop. And I don't know if we mentioned that at the time, but I guess this must have been then right around the time that JBL.
Yeah, I mentioned it. It was in there on the tour. Yeah, it was the June 2004 Germany tour when he did it.
So clearly this was just them, poking a little fun at JBL. But is it kind of sad, Matt, that when I was reading this and it reminded me of that JBL thing, that I was thinking like, oh, it was kind of quaint back when this was a big wrestling controversy. Because it's not cool to goose step in front of a German crowd. But if like that was the worst wrestling story of the month, like this month, that would be like a breath of fresh air compared to some of the stories we're hearing this month.
That is true. Although I will say, I think we especially can verify on this podcast, 2004 had its share of pretty bad wrestling stories also.
Yeah, we might have spent like 3 hours covering just one. And Yeah, so if you go back to the At Our Best episode, which is 6 hours long, the first 3 hours of that is just us covering one bad wrestling story. So yeah, that's a good point. And that's just all the news for the shows. There wasn't that much news not that long of a distance between Death Before Dishonor Part 2, Death Before Dishonor 2 Part 2, the Double Deuce, and Testing the Limit, which is the show we're covering today. Testing the Limit took place August 7th, 2004, once again at the Ramada Inn in Essington, Pennsylvania, which is right close to Philadelphia.
That's the same place they had Survival of the Fittest, right? It looked a little different, but also the same. So
I mean, there's a chance it could have been a different Ramada Inn. I didn't check the city, but I have to imagine it's the same Ramada Inn.
Yes.
In front of a reported crowd of 450 people. A couple of things before we get to the show itself. A few little things happened around the show. First, from The Observer, Christopher Daniels was actually at this show to do a DVD shoot interview. They tried to clear it with TNA to let him work the show, but TNA wouldn't allow it. It's a weird deal because TNA is letting Shelley work, even though he's now a regular on their show, but has offered Ring of Honor some other guys if they want them, but won't allow Daniels and AJ Styles, which are the two guys Ring of Honor wants to work. So yeah, we cover this, I think, in greater detail in the At Our Best show, which is also our big Rob Feinstein 2004 story Fallout episode. But yeah, this was the show, I guess, where Christopher Daniels wanted to work this show. He had an open booking, and he was there before the show recording one of the very first straight shooting Ring of Honor produced shoot interviews, and they just told him, like, no, you can't do it. So I wonder what he would have been slotted in, like. It would have been interesting. It's interesting to think, like, what they would have done with him on this show.
Well, he would have had to have addressed CM Punk, right? You can't, like, just let that, like, kind of go by. But Punk is a babyface now, so it's kind of interesting. You know, it's interesting. I haven't felt the shows have missed AJ or Daniels at all. Like, they've gotten better since they left. Not that they're the reason the shows got better, although in a roundabout way, I guess it sort of is, because it lit a fire under Gabe to go in some new directions and try some new things that have mostly worked. But you know, I don't think that I would have really wanted those guys to, like, necessarily come back at this point as a fan. Obviously, for the company, it would have been good. But when they did finally come back, I don't think that, like, the shows were made dramatically better because of them.
No, and like, I know exactly what you're saying. It's nothing against those two guys, but it's just, I felt the depth of the company with the Generation Next and Nigel starting to catch on and Jimmy Jacobs starting to catch on and get a little more regular bookings and all sorts of things like that. Like, the depth actually got better when I was revisiting all the research around this time. All the talk was, oh, their depth is going to be ruined. They don't have enough star power now. And even when I go back and listen to shooting interviews, like I was re-listening to the Samoa Joe straight shooting for trying to find more information for this episode. Just curious if he talked about this show, which he didn't really. But he talks about during that show, like, people felt like Ring of Honor had lost a step during this period. And I kind of felt like that too. So I had to really step up and stuff. It's like, I think you and I, like, going to our most recent reviews, I think we feel like it kind of gained a step. Like,
but also, I feel like reputationally that's true. Like this era, starting with maybe like Generation Next or World Title Classic, is one of the most fondly remembered eras. You know, like so I don't remember, even before I was a Ring of Honor fan, like hardcore, which really started mostly in 2005. I knew that 04, the second half of 04, was really the era that people really looked upon fondly, not so much 03. So I don't know if, like, I think there was almost a consensus that things got better around this time for people who kept watching anyway. And I think also part of the thing, and you're right, it's not the fault of Daniels and AJ that things were better, when they left. But I will say, when they finally do come back, I do kind of think that they left their best work in TNA, if that makes sense. Like, if you watch them in TNA, they had more great performances there than they were having in ROH at that time. TNA was their priority, so I think they brought just a different vibe to their ROH work than they brought to their TNA work in terms of urgency. You know, not that they were dogging it in ROH, and I guess we'll see when we get there, but I feel like it's hard to explain.
Yeah, that's why I'm really interested in revisiting, because I think that is true. The perception is definitely that when those guys came back to Ring of Honor in the next year, they yeah, I think you're the way you put it is good. They weren't dogging it, but Ring of Honor was maybe no longer the place they were putting their absolute like 10 out of 10 effort. Maybe they were down to like 8 out of 10. It was more like their biggest priority beyond behind their big priority, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
And also,
this
the
is
other thing, I couldn't find out this information, but obviously this Ramada Inn was never like what was supposed to be the main Philadelphia location, and we know that they were there for survival of the fittest because of a mistake, because of a problem involving their booking in Baltimore getting canceled over some of the RF scandal stuff. So I was curious, were they back here on purpose, or was there another problem that led to them coming back to this smaller venue? Like, was it another situation where they wanted to run the Armory, but there was like military or National Guard stuff like happened at Generation Next, or were they just not selling tickets? I was unclear of that, and I couldn't find any good information about it.
I'm not sure, and I'd also be interested. Like, was it a good financial deal to book a show at the Ramada Inn? Because were a couple downsides, and there are things we'll go into during the show. But one of them is the ceilings for the show are pretty low, which a few wrestlers acknowledge in various ways. But there's also something else that happens, Matt. I don't know if you even know what it took place that we'll talk about later in the show, which is kind of a special problem you get when you try to do wrestling angles at a hotel. And we'll talk about that a little later. But and this was a very busy weekend for Ring of Honor, apparently, because going to more of the news around this show, I guess just to remind people, this was right around the time, this was shortly after Ring of Honor had broken away from Rob Feinstein officially and started, basically doing in a way their own version of RF Video, where they weren't maybe as extensive as RF Video, but they were selling DVDs of various promotions and producing their own shoot interviews. And so they were producing the first batch this weekend, I guess, because PW Insider wrote that Samoa Joe also filmed the shoot interview on this day. So Christopher Daniels did, Samoa Joe did, and we know Too Cold Scorpio. In fact, I believe Shane Hagedorn has said that Too Cold Scorpio was the first shoot interview recorded for the Ring of Honor straight shooting series. So all on the same weekend, or probably the same day, they did Too Cold Scorpio, Samoa Joe, and Christopher Daniels. So, they were working hard this weekend filming footage. A couple other little tidbits. The PW Insider wrote that the SATs were backstage visiting for the show. He says, I don't believe there are any plans for their return to the company, but they were backstage visiting. And he also wrote Joel Gertner from ECW popped up visiting as he was in the area. So everyone came to the Ramada Inn to watch Austin Aries and Bryan Danielson. I do feel like it is kind of interesting. Like, if you were to make a wrestling Seinfeld, I think you could probably make an episode or a wrestling Curb Your Enthusiasm about like what it's like when you're the wrestlers who have been booked for an indie, but you still show up backstage to like see your friends. Because I feel like if that was me, like I would feel really awkward. Like, yeah, you guys kind of let me go, but I'm still gonna hang out here. Like maybe that just speaks to my insecurities and potential bitterness, but
I think probably for some guys it's awkward, and probably for other guys everyone's really happy to see them. And the question is, are you self-aware to know which one you are?
yeah. But it's just interesting to think the SATs were backstage during this. And the other thing is this was another one of those shows where Ring of Honor wrote in their newswire that they had a bus trip from New York City to Philadelphia for fans that wanted to see the show.
Oh, I hope the Hit Squad were on the bus.
It was another one of those shows where it says they wrote on the Ring of Honor website, fans on this trip will get to see an exclusive screening of selected matches from Ring of Honor's Death Before Dishonor weekend, including Samoa Joe's world title defense versus Homicide and the much talked about Chicago street fight pitting CM Punk and Ace Steel versus Dan Moff and BJ Whitmer. And I still think that's a really cool idea that Ring of Honor did at least a couple of times to do on these bus trips. Like you're going to get to see matches that haven't even been released yet if you get on this bus trip.
Two awesome matches. That's a hell of a deal.
Yeah. If anything, like that's better. I mean, I'm not to tip my hat on the show, but not that this show was bad by any means, but that's better than a lot of matches on this show are those two matches. You're getting
sure. They would be among the best matches on any show, really.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the show itself. we're back after the Death Before Dishonor weekend. We are back to backstage segments. So we open backstage with Colt Cabana conducting a new installment of Good Times, Great Memories. His first guest is Prince Nana, who is flanked by the Outcast Killers. Colt wonders where Jimmy Rave is. Nana says Rave is in one of his villas in Ghana, getting rubbed down in places Colt has never been rubbed down before. He's
like between his toes. I don't know. So
Lots of
what's a weird place to be rubbed down? Like your earlobe? I don't know.
So yeah, Rave is apparently preparing for his run to the top of Ring of Honor. Nana says Rave is also the inventor of the Styles Clash or Styles Slash, whatever you want to call it. Poor Nana clearly has forgotten the name of AJ Styles' finisher.
He says it will now be known as the Rave Slash.
Yeah, I was going to say
I had to say that one. I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad he did, but like he picked the wrong one. It's clear, like in his head, he's like, was it the Clash or the Slash? And then he just decides it must have been the Slash, and he goes, it'll be known as the Rave Slash. And I was just like, oh, Nana, you had a 50-50 chance. Bad luck, you know.
And speaking of racism, Colt makes some vaguely racist jokes about the names of African countries. Like, he is from the kingdom of, and then just like says some kind of name that sounds like an African sounding name. Like, just not the most respectful.
Yeah. Nana says he's been working on the Outcast Killers for the last couple of months, and they've been doing pretty decent. Cole at this point starts fake crying, thinking that the band Outcast is dead.
Get it? Get it? Outcast Killers? Like Oman Tortuga killed the two members of Outcast?
Big boy, brutally murdered by Diablo Santiago. But the Killers want to know when they're the Killers want to know when they're going to get the same kind of treatment that Jimmy Rave is getting. Nana tells them to shut up, be thankful they're not still working the ring crew like Donna Marcos. And then he tells them to run a bubble bath for him the last time the bubble bath was too cold.
He says, run the bubble bath warm with bubble bath soap. That's what he said. I don't know. I love Nana. He's so ridiculous. I've loved my real life interactions with him that I had many, many, many years ago. He is just such a character. I honestly think he could have been okay, even like on a bigger stage, but it was not to be.
Yeah, it sucks that, you know, he just came up in an era where manager, you know, and basically, I guess you could say that for any manager in the last 20, 25 years or more, that they came up in an era where managers aren't really appreciated and don't have as many venues to really ply their trade. And it sucks because, yeah, he definitely could have been a good manager somewhere.
Definitely.
Like a TV promotion that would have given him more opportunity to be a manager.
Yes, for sure.
And that brings us to the opening match, the Ring of Honor Pure Title #1 contendership. The winner of this match gets a future Pure Title shot. John Walters defeats Nigel McGuinness via pinfall in 8 minutes, 2 seconds with a roll-up. He counters Nigel. Matt, this is not a long match, but what do you think for an 8-minute match to get the show rolling?
I thought it was good. Like, I mean, like faster than I thought it was. Maybe I would have liked it a little bit more, but I guess the early matches were short because they knew how long the main event was going to be, but they were just like going at it. Like, they were just working really hard and the crowd was really into it. They were slapping each other, being aggressive. They were, Nigel was doing his wacky reversals and his trickery. He went for his arm finisher early. I like that Walters hits like a lung blower, but from the front. And then later on, Nigel does a leapfrog over him, and then then Walters does one from the back. Nigel does the Tower of London, and Gabe is like extremely impressed, like he's never seen it before. I feel like he has done that move before, right? They hadn't named it yet, but he did call it. But he has done it, yes. Yeah.
I think he's done it at least once or twice in Ring of Honor, and yeah, you can tell it's still not familiar to Gabe because I think he calls it a stunner bulldog combination.
Yeah, but like I loved the pace. Like I loved how hard they were working. There's really not much of a story to the match, but like. It was all action, I like, they kept going for their holds. And eventually Walters headbutt Nigel while he was in his Indian deathlock. And then he turned it into the key lock and rolled him up in a key lock. So it was kind of a different kind of finisher for Walters. But they were really, really motivated. I also want to mention The lighting on this show, it's definitely different from Survival of the Fittest. It's not all like dark and like grayed out, but it's still bad. It's like bad in its own different way. It has this like weird, like almost like orangey hue, like almost like it was like a cane match from the 1997. Like I don't know how to explain it, but like it's a weird. It's just the light. It's just fun to me that the lighting is still bad, but a total different kind of bad than the last time they were in the building.
You took like the words out of my mouth. That's a perfect way to put it. I wrote in my notes like the lighting is bad again, but in a different way. I guess also not only is the orangey hue, like you said, it's also another show where it's not color balanced. So like the lighting is better, like the color scheme is better when you see the hard camera, and then whenever you get the ringside handheld cam angles, it's noticeably more orangey. So that's like kind of off putting where again, like it's just not consistent even.
Exactly. And of course, they do the thing that happens in a lot of ROH shows where the glare from the corner lights always goes right into the camera when they do the handheld cameras. But that's a constant in ROH for many years to come.
Yeah. Um, I completely agree with you about the quality of this match. I thought this was a good match. It kind of felt to me it's kind of interesting where for a match that's a pure title contendership, not only did they not do any of the pure title rules, but they didn't really do almost any mat work. This is almost all action. It's very, like you said, fast paced. Walters is wrestling with a little bit of a mean streak, slapping, not quite a heel, but he's like slapping Nigel in the face, yelling at him.
He's aggressive. And I guess he does turn heel pretty soon. So
yeah, so maybe hints of that here even. But this felt like the last 8 minutes of a 20-minute match that these guys would have, but in a good way. Like it felt like you were seeing like the stretch run of a longer match, and they were just going like really. They were going for it with bigger and more interesting stuff right from the get-go. I felt like both guys looked good, but I felt Nigel was the star here, and it is that kind of interesting point of Nigel's career, which I think we've talked about him being in before, where fans like know him enough now to start recognizing his signature moves, but there's still a novelty to them. So they're still like really popping bigger than they might be in a year or two because they haven't taken them for granted yet. And you can even hear that in commentary because like we mentioned, Gabe doesn't really know yet to call his finisher the Tower of London. You can tell Punk is like really impressed by that divorce court kind of arm DDT where he grabs the arm and kicks the guy's legs out from under him. So like stuff like that, which will just be commonplace Nigel stuff, it still has a bit of a novelty, I think, to everyone in this area watching it at this point. And it's kind of neat because I think Nigel's one of those guys right now where you revisit this era, you can, maybe it's because it's just in my head, but you can kind of feel him gaining a few new fans with every match he wrestles now. Like I can just imagine every time he wrestles and people see like the headstand, like I think Mike Johnson's live report was this was the one where he wrote something like Nigel McGuinness does this really cool move where he does a headstand and then in the corner and then kicks guys down. Like it was like he first saw it. And I feel like there were people coming away from Nigel every match he had at this point going like, oh man, there's this guy just doing this really cool stuff, and he was making new fans every show. So
yeah, and I also, he's Nigel, you could tell he's just really wants it really bad, even early. I mean, we talked about, I don't even know how many months ago it was that we recorded this show, but that random match in Ohio against TJ Hawk where he does the super famous headbutt hard way bleeding spot, against the ring post. So we know that Nigel is just he's just really going to work hard pretty much every time we see him. So he's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, and especially when you hear like the stories, I believe people said the people who worked with Nigel very early on in his career was like he is one of the wrestlers that's come the farthest. Like when he first started training, he was not a natural. You would never believe, like you wouldn't think he was going to make it, and he just kept working until he got really good. And even just watching how hard he took when he had to retire, like you can tell this is a guy that's just 110. Like he worked his ass off for everything. He wasn't one of those guys who makes things look effortless. Like he clearly put his heart and soul into getting as good as he got, which again, it's sad that he did not get the career he deserved. But
yeah, that Nigel documentary with WWE was very good, for the record.
So yeah, this was a fun match. A little on the short side, not much story, but just for an opener, it's a good burst of nothing but action, and especially after the last show, Death Before Dishonor Part 2, that where other than the main event, everything felt like really good workers having good matches, but kind of holding back. This at least did not feel like they were holding back at all. So I really appreciated that too. And that brings us to the second match on the show. That is Roderick Strong defeated Izzy, who was escorted to the ring by Angel Dust, Becky Bayless, Cheech and Cloudy. And Roderick Strong wins in 6:31 via pinfall after he hits, I guess, what you would call a cross-armed spinal shock. This was a fun match. I felt like this was mostly felt like a squash/showcase for Strong, with Izzy getting a couple moments to shine. Izzy gets like the first minute. He hits a super fast start where he hits a few of his moves, and then Strong catches him on a Rana attempt, and then he swings him really hard into the guardrail and ring post, and most of the rest of the match is Roderick dominating, and he hits, most of the stuff you would come to know as his signature moves. He does hard chops. He does backbreaker variations. He does a delayed vertical suplex because he's strong. He does a couple painful-looking submissions. Izzy gets a little bit of a comeback. He hits what looks like a flipping DDT, but his arms never really get around Strong's head. But luckily, the camera angle changes really quickly. The move is done really fast, and Strong totally lays out face first on it. So unless you're like a nerd like me who goes, that looked a little off, and you go back and freeze frame it, and to figure out why it felt off to you, you wouldn't even really notice. And it was a cool looking move. And the end, which I referenced, is really cool too, which is Strong is throwing punches. Strong first throws a right-handed punch, and Izzy catches it with his left arm. He ties it up, and then Strong throws a left punch, and Izzy ties it up with his right arm. And while they're still holding arms, Strong just basically turns Izzy and lifts him up into a hanging neck breaker position where they're back to back, and Izzy is basically held by his crossed arms on Strong's back. And then he does the spinal shock, and which is a really cool, inventive, not his regular finisher end to a match. And this was another match, I think, Matt, like the Nigel match, where you can tell, see a guy is just starting to catch on, because this is one of the early times where we get a Roderick's gonna kill you chant, where Roderick is now starting to get this reputation of something, which in his case is he's gonna just beat the hell out of somebody, especially if he's wrestling a Special K guy. So it's cool to see all these guys. A few months ago, we saw a lot of these guys start to become regulars or debut, and now we're seeing a lot of them start to get a bit of a fan following here. It's a cool moment in Ring of Honor history.
Right, because they've been in this area a bunch of times already, and because the videos are coming out.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this is basically a squash, but Izzy gets to look good while getting squashed, taking good bumps, kicking out a lot. And it also for further Special K storyline, which is that they're depressed, they're in a rut. So I like that. I like the delayed vertical suplex. I like the pop that he does when he gets these big power moves. He really connects with them in a dynamic way, I guess is the best way I would say it. Izzy doesn't get to do too much. Like you said, he gets a little bit of shine early, and he gets an unassisted slice spread number 2, which allows a fan to yell "French toast number 3," which I enjoyed.
That for you. You messaged me when it happened. You were so excited about, and there's a lot of annoying fan things. I think we could both agree that's a good fan talk.
Yeah, and actually on this show, I could hear a lot of random fan yelling. I guess because of the way the venue was. It was very easy to hear certain fans just yell certain things, and that was a good one. Punk is back on commentary, no Mark Nolte, so Punk, we get some things that are, quote, some gems and some not so gems. For example, when Gabe calls Roderick Strong the Messiah of the Backbreaker, Punk says, of course he's the Messiah of the Backbreaker by default. He doesn't know any other moves. And, that works because Punk is mad at Generation Next, of course. There is Next Feud. Also, in a less good thing, Gabe calls Becky super cute, which is weird in its own right. And then Punk responds, hey, where do you get off calling her super huge? So, 2004, everybody. being creepy toward women in two different ways at the same time. So you got that. But no, all in all, I thought this was a fun squash.
Roderick Strong does a camel clutch to Izzy, and he really steps at Izzy's back. Like he puts his foot right in it and pulls back, and it's almost Danielson versus Jack Evans-esque. It's a really good submission. But yeah, that's the only thing I forgot to mention. And PW Insider, their live report from this match, I guess we should note there's a lot of editing, I think, on this show, maybe more noticeable editing than you'd see on some other shows, in part probably because the main event is 76 minutes long. So I guess they cut this in. After this match ends, they go right to the next segment. But I guess after this match live, Roderick Strong laid out Cloudy and Cheech's Special K. Strong was then menacing Becky Bayless when Angel Dust hit a flurry of moves and ran him off. Mike Johnson wrote, I guess it's going to be Dust versus Roderick next. Works for me. Just to note, we saw none of this on the home release. We just see the end of the match immediately next segment. So, they had to trim stuff to make this fit onto a 3-hour DVD.
Yeah, except for entrances where, like, they're noteworthy, they cut out the entrances almost completely, especially in these early matches.
And we cut to Allison Danger in the ring. She is still wearing a neck brace from taking the cop killer from Homicide 2 shows ago. She's cutting a promo that's really hard to hear over the awful PA system at the Ramada Inn, and the crowd is chanting against her. We can hear that I could make out that she's still mad at Moff and Whitmer. She still owns their contracts and can book their opponents. She introduces the Carnage crew, and we cut out their ring entrance as the show is definitely, again, like you just mentioned, we're keeping the edits tight to fit in everything. Danger tells the crew that there's no one they can't beat up, and she wants them to torture Moff and Whitmer tonight. DeVito snatches the mic away from her and says they have to listen to their nagging wives at home. They're not going to listen to a bitch like Danger. DeVito says they fight for themselves and tells her to get out of the ring. And we immediately take another jump cut right to the match itself, which is the Carnage crew of DeVito and Loke defeating Moff and Whitmer in 5 minutes, 39 seconds when DeVito pinned Moff after they hit like the spike second rope pile driver. So this is another thing, Matt, before I throw it to you, where I guess live, the timing I got from live reports was 9 minutes, 17 seconds. But what we saw, I timed out only as 5 minutes, 39 seconds. So I'm going to guess they edited out almost 4 minutes out of this match again to make things fit. And the other thing I didn't know until I did the research for this was, according to Mike Johnson, DeVito actually got to the show as the first match was starting due to travel issues. So the match they put together with so little planned was great considering the circumstances. So yeah, this was apparently, he just barely got to the show in time for this match.
Wow.
So what'd you think about this hastily put together brawl on the outside?
Reminiscent of Samoa Joe at Arena Warfare in 2006, where he misses his main event because of flight delays. So DeVito has, besides getting there late, has an auspicious start because he starts by going up to Danger and saying, we don't listen to our goddamn wives at home, so we're not going to listen to a bitch like you, which makes me say, and since the crowd pops when they hear the word bitch, just makes me say, man, wrestling was so incel back then, wasn't it? Like, it was just like, that was the whole vibe of the entire thing. Maybe less so the mainstream stuff, but definitely indie wrestling, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, like I said, I've said it a million times, it's that ECW influence sticking around. I feel like it's definitely less that way now, but I don't know, probably there's still some strains of it.
Well, I think back to that, just sorry to interrupt, but I think back to that show in 2003 where they got Jeff Hardy in, and there was a bunch of extra female fans there just for Jeff Hardy, and you could tell, like, the male regulars, some of them resented it. Like, they were angry at the female fans that were not usually there. Like they were, instead of being, oh, this is cool, it's a bigger crowd, there's some more women here, it's like, goddamn fucking women at our Ring of Honor show, like, just angry.
In like 2007, I literally heard people in line to get into a Ring of Honor show say that, like, oh man, the women being here that ruins everything. I literally heard that. So like, yeah, what your interpretation is what people said. And just to add to my point, on commentary, Punk refers to Allison Danger as a, quote, ugly bitch. So was that just like considered totally innocuous at the time by the audience that would watch this? I guess so. Crazy. But yeah, it's this is the first of 3 tag matches on this show that start out just brawling around the ringside. Like, every tag match on the show starts out that way. This is the first one, so it doesn't seem redundant yet. But they're just brawling on the outside. Moff goes for a tope, and Loke throws him headfirst into the guardrail on the way down. And there's just a lot of smacking and chopping at ringside for a while until Moff steps on Loke's groin, and Punk says, "Loke usually pays women to do that, but Moff is doing it for free." And Gabe is very confused. So Punk has to explain, some people are into that. So then in the ring, they go right to the big moves. I guess you said it's edited, but like there's a burning, Loke escapes a burning hammer, hits Saito suplex. DeVito goes for a moonsault on Moff, but he rolls out of the way and hits a big clothesline. Whitmer hits an exploder, which Gabe calls a nice suplex, which is something that I've noticed a few times recently where Gabe didn't notice that a guy hit their finisher. That same thing happened with the Border City stretch at Death Before Dishonor, one of those shows. It's weird. It's like that's clearly the thing that's been his finisher or like one of his big moves for the entire time he's been in ROH. But Gabe was just like, nice suplex. Did you notice that?
Yeah, it's a little more acceptable when someone like Nigel, who's probably only done it once or twice in Ring of Honor, but BJ Whitmer's used the exploder quite a long time at this point in Ring of Honor.
Yeah. So everyone's suplexing everyone at that point. Danger sneaks down and pulls Moff's leg while he's on the top rope, and he gets crotched, and that allows the Spike Pile Driver to be hit by the Carnage crew. So I wouldn't say this was much of a match, but I also wouldn't say it was lacking in excitement. Maybe because of the editing, it felt pretty action-packed and pretty entertaining. Definitely wasn't like a particularly good match, but it was enjoyable for the length of time that it lasted.
Yeah, it was kind of your regular brawl on the outside, but I felt, and a lot of times where it feels just kind of meaningless and plotting, but I felt like these guys brought good energy to the bit that we got, and it was one of those things where it was short, but I enjoyed it. It wasn't anything special. It's not something you're going to remember or need to go out of your way to see, but I enjoyed it for what it was. But it was also one of those ones where I felt like if this went on much longer, I probably would have soured on it, but at the amount of it we got, I thought like it was pretty enjoyable. And DeVito, I liked one moment where DeVito hits his big drop kick on the outside, and it looked like he sold the drop kick just landing from a drop kick as much as his opponent sold from taking the drop kick. Like it was a Herculean effort for DeVito even just to launch himself into the air by a few feet and fall, which to be fair for a guy with that much mass, it probably is a big effort to
I would be tired.
Yeah. And we got Moff's big tope, which he breaks out sometimes, it's kind of sad for Moff because he does have a very good tope, but like when you're in the same promotion as Homicide, who does that amazing, like world's best tope con hilo, like no one's tope comes, and even Samoa Joe's like elbow suicida through the ropes. Like I feel like in a different promotion where those two guys weren't around, Moff's big tope would be like way more impressive and crowd pleasing, where it's kind of like the third best big man dive, or I guess Homicide's not a big man, but just guys who wouldn't expect to do crazy dives like that. And then we got also a big belly to belly suplex from Moff on DeVito, and I wrote that's a lot of belly, and then I felt guilty for writing that, but it's just because DeVito's very much one of those guys where almost all his extra weight is carried in his midsection, which I heard is not good for your cardiovascular system. So folks, if you're got a big stomach and not much big else, be careful out there. Okay match. So at this point, another thing we didn't see on the show, PW Insider reports, Gary Michael Capetta came out, and this is where they announced that Jim Cornette, Stanley, and Dennis Condrey, and Bobby Eaton would all reunite as the Midnight Express on the promotion's return to Philadelphia on October 2nd. Mike Johnson wrote, they played the Midnight's theme after the announcement. It got a pretty big pop, which surprised me as Ring of Honor's audience skews younger. I thought the interesting thing, I didn't get this quote, but I think Meltzer wrote it in the Observer. He noted that basically every Ring of Honor show from this point to I think like early November had some big name booked for it. Like Foley was booked for shows. Steamboat was still doing shows. You got the Cornette thing here. Later on, I don't think they had announced it quite yet, but Liger or maybe they had. I'm not sure, but and I don't know if this was Ring of Honor's response to finally finalizing the sale and break away from Feinstein, or if they felt like they really needed this to try and bring fans back. But it definitely is interesting where this is probably I mean, they've always through their history brought in big names, but yeah, we're definitely entering a stretch where there's going to be at least one like notable non-wrestler name, like non-wrestler as in they're not working the show in a match, on pretty much every show for a while. And in the case of Liger, well, he will be working the shows.
Yeah, it's interesting how much stuff they cut out of this. Wow, like some major stuff.
Yeah. Usually, I don't think they usually show the announcements. Like whenever, like I don't think also they show the announcement of. Well, maybe they do. I don't think they do of like Liger. They didn't show the announcement of Foley, which apparently got a big reaction and led to people like rushing to buy tickets from that show. But yeah, it seems like a lot of these live reports on these last few shows has been like, even reading the newswires have been a lot of like, you won't believe what we have to announce, and it was like, Mick Foley one show, Midnight Express reunion one show.
It makes it makes the promotion feel, and I guess maybe this was the idea, like it had turned a corner in terms of some of these scandals, also, which I think is pretty helpful. Like that, all these people now want to be a part of ROH. I'm sure Steamboat helped a lot with that too.
Yeah, he was like one of the first. And when you think about, Piper was going to work and cancel, or not wrestle, but like going to be at the Ring of Honor show before the Feinstein scandal broke and canceled. Heenan canceled his booking, and Heenan would end up doing his booking late in this year, 2004. So yeah, that's a great point where just the fact that anyone like on Foley's level and Liger's level or whatever are willing to now come back. It's more than just, isn't it cool that we're bringing these guys? It's kind of like a sign of it's okay to like us now. Maybe like if these big names like us, maybe you can too, which I don't know if that's always the greatest North Star to set your morals by, to go, well, if wrestlers are willing to work this show for money, it's okay for me to like them. But like I have to imagine, send a message to certain fans of like, well, maybe I should stop boycotting this promotion.
Yeah, and their popularity grew, so it worked.
Yeah. And that brings us to a 4-corner survival match. Alex Shelley defeated Ace Steel, Jay Lethal, and Too Cold Scorpio in 14 minutes, 58 seconds when Shelley pins Lethal after he hits the shell shock. Before the match, Alex Shelley gets on the mic and he says he just has to say something. And what he has to say is, "Flash, you are so funky." So having a little fun with Too Cold. Alex says he's going to use Too Cold as a stepping stone, just like they used Ace Steel as one in Chicago. Shelley then turns his attention to Jay Lethal. He says that Jay's serious now. He doesn't do drugs anymore, and Alex is sure Jay's parents are real proud of him. This gets some laughs and a sheepish grin from Jay as he turns to look at a section of his crowd, which I assume was where his mom, who frequently came to the shows, was sitting in. Shelley says Jay belongs to Generation Next, and he's going to give him one more chance to join. Jay says he's not going to take the shortcuts anymore, though, and from now on he's going to earn what he gets. So the answer is no. Shelley then jumps him, and the match is on. So
I have to say, I thought "Flash, you are so funky" was a pretty corny burn. I usually like Shelley's commentary. I'm not commentary, promos, but that was pretty dorky, I think.
And I also think the Generation Next stuff, like, it's getting a little tired where every single match, the line is always like, we're going to make our name on you. We're going to, take your spot. Like, it's the same one line he's saying. And, Alex Shelley is very good on the mic, but he's got the same one line for every match now. Like, so-and-so, we're going to take your name just like we took Ricky Steamboat out. It's like the same thing. It's getting a little repetitive at this point. But I have to remind myself, not everyone was watching and buying every single Ring of Honor DVD. So sometimes repetition was warranted. But this was Too Cold Scorpio's I believe his only match in Ring of Honor. At least I think of the Gabe era. My knowledge of Ring of Honor gets way worse after that, but it's the only match I can remember Too Cold Scorpio did in Ring of Honor. He was living in Germany at this time and was working as a regular in Pro Wrestling Noah. In fact, in the match, they acknowledged that like he and Ace Steel are like friends from working together in Pro Wrestling Noah.
And they talk about Noah in the match, and they're talking about how they wrestled Kenta, Marufuji, and Liger. And Gabe was like, "I'd love to have those guys in ROH." but he doesn't think it'll ever happen, which I guess, to tease the Liger appearance. But what I found most amusing about that was like Punk, he said, you bring in Kenta and ROH. I'm there. I'm calling that match. And I'm like, well, he did bring in Kenta, and Punk was not there.
Yeah, I actually thought that was such a funny moment. I actually clipped that and put that on my Twitter, and someone said something like, did that get to happen? I had to tell them, like, no, like, Punk left in the middle of 2005, and Kenta debuts at Final Battle 2005. So basically, he missed Kenta by half a year. He could have been calling if he stuck around just 6 more months. He could have been calling Kenta in Ring of Honor, but just missed it. So yeah, Scorpio at this point was living in Germany, so he wasn't a guy they were going to get to book regularly. But I actually enjoyed this match a fair bit, and it was mostly because of Scorpio. I think something I found as I rewatch all these four ways is there's generally 2 ways, 4 ways, with some rare exceptions happen. They're either like basically scramble matches where they're just crazy spot fests, or everyone just trades off and they try and do these short little 3 to 4 minute mini matches where it's like, okay, you tag in, you can wrestle me for a few minutes, I'll tag out, you wrestle this guy for a few minutes. And it's kind of like mini matches and not really a spot fest. And I found watching all these shows, I much prefer the spot fest because the mini matches don't really have a lot of momentum to them.
Sometimes they also do a third version, which is almost like a tag team match where like they team up and somebody gets the heat on somebody for a while.
Oh yeah.
But generally speaking, that you're right about the formula.
But this match was more of like the mini matches, but which I usually am not the hugest fan of. But I liked it because so much of this match was about Too Cold Scorpio, and it was just really fun to see him in Ring of Honor. I felt like he looked pretty good. He was almost 39 at this point, and watching this match, I realized that Too Cold Scorpio is this guy where I think he's one of the most like low key, consistent wrestlers where everyone you mentioned Too Cold Scorpio, pretty much everyone's like, yeah, he's awesome. But you kind of take it for granted. Like, even in this era, like, whenever I see him work in indie, I always just think to myself, oh, Too Cold Scorpio, this will be good. And he like, pretty much every time is good. Like, you just kind of take it for granted that he's consistent. I think at this age, he still had his athleticism, his execution, and the whole match is kind of built around him. Like I said, you can tell watching this match, I feel like, that everyone really wanted to wrestle Scorpio, especially Jay Lethal and Alex Shelley, and everyone gets their chance. I thought Too Cold did a really cool thing late in the match where he starts like tagging guys in and directing traffic, but then he'll be like, you tag in, you hit him with this move, and then afterwards he'll like double cross the guy. And I felt like he was really smartly playing the four corner match where I don't know how many four corners matches Scorpio's ever worked, but I felt like he was actually kind of working the stipulation really well. And yeah, I think most of this match was fun just because for me, it wasn't, particularly great, but I enjoyed the novelty of seeing Too Cold Scorpio in Ring of Honor and looking pretty good, in my opinion. Matt, I've read online some reviews. I saw a couple of reviews that were pretty negative on Too Cold Scorpio's performance in this match, saying like he was dogging it and he was selfish and stuff. Like, so am I crazy or are they crazy? And I'm not going to name anyone because I don't want to shame anyone and you have a right to your opinion, but I'm just curious to see if you can break the tie.
Yeah, I'm closer to you. Maybe didn't like it quite as much as you, but I thought it was pretty good. And I did think that Scorpio, honestly, I definitely don't think he dogged it. I think, if anything, he did more than I expected. I did not expect him to be quite as much of a focal point in the match and be in as much as I thought he would be. I mean, as much as he was. Like, I thought he would be in much less, and the other guys would work the body of the match, and he would come in for some big spots. That was my expectation going in. I don't know if you had the same expectation. But he was really the guy who was the main person in the match. Like, he was the glue. Everybody had their little, like, challenge against him. Like, Ace and Scorpio, they sort of did their indie respect match. Then you had Lethal, who was like kind of working from underneath the underdog, like trying to prove something. And then you had Shelley, who kept poking everybody in the eye, which I liked. But I definitely thought that Scorpio was working really hard. He did all of his big moves. He was a little bit methodical. There's a lot of time in between each move, but he had good kicks. He had he teamed up with Lethal a little bit. He teamed up with Ace a little bit, and then double crossed him. So like Scorpio had his like finger in every little pot, which I liked. I really thought that he was very present in the match in a way that I did not expect. And his moves look good. I like the power bomb that he gave on Lethal. I liked that, he kept being sneaky. Like I said before, he held Lethal for Ace to drop kick him, then he hit Ace. Then he was double teaming Shelley with Lethal, and he set Shelley up for a Lethal headbutt. But then when Lethal went for the headbutt, he rolled Shelley out of the way, so Lethal missed. I just liked that he was being sneaky, that he was having personality. Um, and I liked, but then like they still put over Shelley in the end. And I feel like everyone was put over by this match. I thought Scorpio looked good. Ace Steel doesn't usually get to have a lot of like matches on his own, and I thought he was allowed to be pretty good. Lethal definitely felt like the up and comer, and Shelley got to win. So I think everybody kind of won in this match. So I would say a pretty good match. It was maybe a little bit slower than I would have liked, but it was pretty good all in all. And I think the psychology was sound.
Yeah, I feel like, some people are going to say, oh, well, Scorpio's the guy only coming in for one match and he's the older guy, so he's taking up too much of the match. But I feel like you're kind of that, like you were saying, they struck a really, I think, good balance in giving Scorpio a highlights and giving you what you want to see, but also putting over other guys because, it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation because how many times have we seen in wrestling where an indie books a big name and they do like 4 signature spots and do as little as possible. And that's really disappointing to see. And to Scorpio's credit, he did, you got your money's worth booking him. He spent, he worked a lot of this match and like you said, basically kind of directed traffic and ran the match. And in fact, a point I'll make from a Mike Johnson news report on this, he wrote, Scorpio looked to be in great shape and was working really hard. He did an impromptu seminar with a lot of the boys before the show, working matches with them and giving them tips. It was something he just offered to do on the fly as opposed to something he was brought in to do. That says a lot about him. So again, I saw, one review saying that, Scorpio is selfish and stuff. To me, it sounds like he was the opposite where he was going out of his way, and we'll get to in a second, he goes out of his way to put over the company and Jay Lethal after the match. So it sounds like he was a very good booking for this company and an example of a guy who, spent his one booking there trying his most to help everybody out.
I agree. I agree completely.
After the match, Alex Shelley gets on the mic again, and he apologizes to Lethal for making him look like a sack of shit in front of his parents. Shelley says he was wrong about Jay. He's not Generation Next material after all. There's a fun moment where mid-promo, Alex Shelley promo, Ace Steel balls up his ring tape and throws it at Shelley, and he hits him as Shelley's mid-sentence, and Shelley just pauses and goes, ouch, on the mic. And it's kind of one of those things you have to see yourself. Like, I can't do it justice. But it was a funny moment that got some laughs. Shelley says it doesn't matter if it's Bryan Danielson, doesn't matter if it's CM Punk, doesn't matter if it's that washed-up garbage wrestler, Mick Foley. They're climbing over the top of all of them to get to the top of the card. Shelley goes to leave, but Jay Lethal challenges Shelley to a one-on-one match. Too Cold then gets on the mic and he says, this shit is for real about Ring of Honor, and says it's the real deal because of each and every one of us in the crowd, the fans. Scorpio says this is the first time he's ever seen Jay Lethal, and he puts him over as, Matt, you might guess, the real deal.
I even wrote after that, this show should be called The Real Deal.
Yeah, you can tell after this one promo, Scorpio likes that phrase. They hug. Too Cold's music hits as he proceeds to show off a few of his dance moves in the ring. Lethal keeps going to leave the ring, but Too Cold wants to teach him to dance. He eventually gets Jay to do something. He does the Rick Rude hip swivel to some high-pitched screams from the crowd. And then Scorpio starts pulling down his trunks to the degree that we can see his ass and his, what looked to be maybe thong underwear underneath. I don't. That might be the picture for this show. I might have to go and screen cap that.
Wow, it's a bold choice, Trevor.
But luckily he stops before it's too late, before it becomes a picture I couldn't use for the screen cap of the show. And he stops. The two hug. They laugh. They pose for the crowd.
If Jay Lethal was still hydro and still on those drugs, he would have danced because he was a raver. He would have done some rave moves.
I thought this was just fun. You could tell, it was like a genuine thing. and Scorpio was really having fun. And again, just an example of he didn't have to do that, but he kept wanting to, entertain the fans and put over guys. A lot of other wrestlers would just have probably gone to the back, but he did this whole extra little thing, and
yeah,
that was really cool.
And they kept it on the video despite all the edits, so I appreciated that. It is funny watching Jay Lethal at this point, and you realize how completely miscast he was as a party animal.
Yeah, exactly. He's so sheepish and kind of like, especially when you consider his mom is in the crowd all the time.
Yeah, he's a little bit dorky, right? Like, I mean, I don't say that with any malintent either. He just was.
Yeah, he's kind of like just the shy, lovable, quiet kid in the back of the class. Yeah, and to think he started out as hydro. He loves the weed. He loves the party. Like, he doesn't come off that way. And this was another match too where I think I wrote in my notes, Matt, for this match, people in the crowd were, I think, mocking Jay Lethal's mom by making high-pitched screams when he's on offense, or is that just his mom? I can't tell. Like, that's something I wrote. It's hard for me to tell.
I'll go back and listen, but decent chance that it was in fact his mother.
You mentioned earlier how this was a show where, for whatever reason, you could really hear fan comments distinctly. There was one during this match where a few fans were chanting Alex Shelley, and you could clearly hear one fan yell and like being angry, "Stop cheering the heel!"
Oh yes, I remember that.
And this was definitely the era where heels were starting to get cheered on the indies, and there were some fans, and I would prefer if it was strict face heel, but there's something so dorky about just screaming out, "Stop cheering the heel!" Like it's, I don't know, it's just. It was just funny.
He's still a heel to me. Damn it!
Like, you're not cheering right. And again, I'm not necessarily completely unsympathetic to his point, but it's just there's something about saying it. It just was just funny. Well, I also liked one last thing, really important that I don't miss this, Matt. At one point, Alex Shelley bailed to the outside, and Roderick Strong blew on his pecs to cool him off, and I just had to mention that. It was a fun moment, and I wonder if that would actually work. This summer, Matt, I'm going to ask someone to blow on. Well, first I'm going to have to get pecs, and then I'm going to have to ask somebody to blow on them.
Trevor, that is optimistic that you can get close enough to somebody that they can blow on you, and that it would be an okay and not dangerous thing to do.
I forgot for the last 20 minutes what world we were living in. And unfortunately, I am now reminded.
I apologize.
People cannot blow on my pecs.
I apologize.
Well, Matt, there were so many barriers to that scenario becoming a reality. We don't, coronavirus or no coronavirus. But that brings us
just as long as you don't let somebody fart on your pecs.
that fecal pec contamination, number one killer. We go to another match that will hopefully take our minds back off the world situation. The Briscoes, Jay and Mark, defeated Homicide and Low Key, scored to the ring by Julius Smokes in 12 minutes, 44 seconds, when Jay pins Low Key with a small package. Matt, this would end up being the Briscoes' last match in Ring of Honor for quite some time. Well, at least by our recording standards. We'll probably be senior citizens before we get to unless this pandemic continues, before we see the Briscoes again. But I don't think this was not intended to be their last match, because they did have future Ring of Honor bookings, but Mark then gets hurt in a motorcycle accident, which we'll cover in future episodes, and Jay pulls himself off the shows as well, and then they just they do other things in their life. They take a break from wrestling. So without really anyone, including the Briscoes, knowing it, this is their swan song for a while in Ring of Honor. What do you think about the tag match?
Yeah, their last match for a year and a half. Wow. So I'll talk about the match first, and then after you recap the post match, I will talk about my thoughts on that. So, like I said, this is the second straight tag match. It starts with just a brawl on the outside. They're trading chops on the floor. And speaking of heels getting cheered, Low-Key starts the match getting very cheered, like loud Low-Key chant. This is his first match back in Philly since, since Night of Champions, maybe? I can't even, I'm pretty sure it might even be that this is the first time he's actually had a match in Philly since then in ROH. I'm not sure. But I actually thought that he did a really good job of getting the crowd to treat him like a heel. It's not the slow plotting version of his heel work that we saw at Death Before Dishonor Part 2. I thought he moved a lot faster, but he still was healing. They were still, Smokes was cheating, which allowed, Low-Ki to be the heel. Smokes actually kicked and raked Jay's back, which I was surprised by. Some annoying stuff to me is just like how the ref totally misses all that stuff. I think you were talking about this on the Death Before Dishonor shows. Like, they don't really do much to distract the ref, right? They just do heel stuff, and the ref either has to pretend that he was incidentally distracted or just wasn't distracted and didn't care, right?
Yeah, they don't protect the ref, as the kids might say. They don't give the ref a good out.
Yeah, exactly. So they get the crowd chanting for Jay. Low-Ki finally gets the crowd to turn on him, but in an entertaining way. And then the Rottweilers do like a normal heel tag work. They're tagging back and forth very quickly. And like Homicide, he slaps Jay and tells him he ain't shit, and that riles Jay up. But then Homicide just pokes him in the eye. A lot of eye poking on this show, I've noticed. During all this, Gabe calls Low-Ki. He says he used to be the ROH legend, but now he's the ROH disgrace, which is not quite as good as saying that Julius Smokes used to be such a cool guy, but I still liked it. Low-Ki should have gone with that as his moniker, the ROH disgrace, Low-Ki. So Mark, he gets the ref's attention while Homicide locks in a figure four on Jay, and then Low-Ki comes off the top with a double stomp while the hold is applied. So like Mark is, being kind of counterproductive here for Jay. But Jay does make a comeback when he's in the figure four, and he hits a big Yakuza kick and makes the hot tag. And Mark hits a series of kicks, but then again gets cut off with, you guessed it, an eye rake. But he does a springboard drop kick and clothesline combo on the Rottweilers. Like, he hits one of them with a drop kick and another one with a clothesline, which I thought was really cool. And they go for the springboard doomsday, but Homicide pulls down Mark, and Key gets the dragon clutch on Jay. But Jay escapes, goes for the Jay driller. Key escapes and just kicks Jay in the head. Then Low-Ki hits a series of kicks to Mark, grabs the leg, suplexes him in the head, and Mark says he's going for the shooting star press, and I don't know, I found this funny. He's like, the announcers are talking about how the ceiling is too low for Mark to go for the shooting star press. So Homicide gets behind him and quote-unquote pushes him into the ceiling overhang, but Mark obviously has to jump to hit it. Like, it's like he pushes him like upward into the overhang, which is not how it would work. Yeah. But you know what? I'm willing to suspend my disbelief for that, because I thought it was a kind of cool use of the space. I don't know about you. I didn't mind it.
I didn't even really see, like, it was hard to really see like the bump. I saw more just the impact. I just saw more Mark's like bump and reaction, and the crowd really was into it. They thought it was really cool, so I thought it was cool. But when you actually think about it, and what you actually see isn't actually that impressive, but like the aftermath and reaction is pretty cool.
Definitely. And I think that, like I said, there's enough suspension of disbelief in wrestling that if a guy has to jump a little bit to hit his head on something, I'm fine with it. So Homicide hits the lariat, but the ref won't count because he's not the legal man, which I thought was just hilarious. Like, since when has anyone cared about that in ROH? Like, it's so selective. So Jay hits the Jay driller on Homicide. Low-Ki goes for the key crusher, but Jay rolls him up for the 3. So the Briscoes and Jay Briscoe, in his last match for a year and a half, pins Low-Ki. And Gabe says it's the first time that Low-Ki's been pinned since he lost the ROH title in 2002, which is crazy. And I thought this was a good match. Like, I thought this was just no caveats. This was just a good match. Like, it was fast paced. They worked hard. The moves looked cool. The match had heat. Everyone is really good in the match. It wasn't epic or like astounding. They didn't swing for the fences, but they just had a good tag team match. That everything I thought worked. I'm gonna save my thoughts for the post match. After you go over it. But that's what I thought of the match.
I thought this was a good match too, and I think it's another one of these matches where if you just look at the names on paper and the era it took place in, you might expect this to be amazing and then get disappointed. But if you go in expecting just a good mid-card tag match, you're not going to be disappointed, I don't think. Really fast start, and then it slows down in the middle where Jay is the face in peril, and then it speeds up again at the finish. But I think even in that middle part was elevated by a couple things. One, I think something you did a really good job describing and pointing out on the last show during the Mark Briscoe versus Low Key review is that Low Key is working different and, doing things and working at a different. I still thought he was working a bit of that slower pace, but he's doing it to get the fans to turn against him. And he's effectively getting some of them to turn. He's getting some real boos in this match again, which is really hard for the indies.
I think he strikes a better balance here, though, like between the more like the slower pace, but also like doing just enough that it's exciting.
Yeah, and it is also just in the middle of the match where you would expect, like when you're beating down the face, to see that, and then it picks up back again for the finish. And I thought the crowd really elevated this whole match between this and the last show, which had these four guys wrestle in two singles matches. I feel like the crowd on both these shows, one of the things they were most into on each of the nights were these Briscoes versus Homicide and Low Key matches. I feel like more than I would expect. Even they were just really into the idea of these guys wrestling each other, and so it is a shame that they had to stop wrestling because it feels like there was maybe more to go. Like I was just shocked about how loud the crowd was for chanting for Jay, chanting against Low Key, and of course they were really shocked to see Low Key take a rare pinfall loss in Ring of Honor. But Matt, there's one highlight of this match you missed, and I'm not going to let us miss. Did you notice in the middle of the match, somebody, I think it's legendary Philadelphia Commissioner Frank Talent, just calmly strolls through the curtain as this match is happening in full view of the hard camera, just walking down the aisle with not a care in the world, holding a mug of coffee, just slowly walking down, and he sits at the timekeeper table. And it's funny because occasionally watching Ring of Honor or Indies, you see people that have to come through the back curtain during a match, and usually they're ducking down and very sheepishly and quickly just try not to steal focus. And Frank Talent came out like he was the next entrant in the Royal Rumble. He was just slowly walking, holding his beverage. Just, I almost would have, you almost would expect him just to stop in the aisle and start having a conversation with a fan. He did not care.
Did he high five the fans?
No, unfortunately, this would have been a great match if he had done that. I would have 5 stars if he had done that. But that was a fun moment for me. At least I was going, "What the hell was Frank Talent doing here?" Again, it might not even be Frank Talent. I'm pretty sure it was Frank Talent.
I'm actually pretty sure he definitely was at this show. I saw him during another match, at ringside. I think he's always at ringside for these shows in Philadelphia, and I guess he went to the back to get some coffee. I don't know.
So, and that brings us to, and again, it's interesting that Low Key, who was a guy who really protected himself, he loses to a small package here. And Matt, you were talking, I just realized, or a roll-up, a small package. This is, we're going to see another tag match coming up where it ends with a small package. So you were talking about a lot of matches starting with the same brawling. This is something, occasionally you see in Ring of Honor, and you see a lot in indies where, in a company that was maybe a little more, had more agenting, maybe guys would get more on the same page and you wouldn't repeat a finish in 2 key tag matches that are close together like that. But they do it here. But I don't think it's that much of a detriment or anything. So that brings us to what happens after the match. And after the match, Key kicks Jay right in the head, which, it gets a reaction, but it doesn't come off as more than a really stiff low key kick. But we're supposed to believe that this is, he's shooting. He's this is him going on like how he did on Dan Moff. He's going beyond the pale here. And Mark comes in. He tries to defend Jay, which brings out Samoa Joe to the ring to brawl with the Rottweilers. He's joined soon after in the ring by CM Punk and a bunch of other ROH wrestlers who all try and break things up. I wrote, usually when Ring of Honor does pull apart angles, they just use ref and staff. So it's interesting to see this. One of the ways they try to differentiate this is they brought out the big name wrestlers, including guys that, hadn't come out through the curtain yet. So this was their first appearance in front of the crowd tonight, was actually just this. And everything seems to have settled down when Joe hits Key right in the face with a really brutal looking punch. Things pick up again. Someone throws a chair from off camera and hits somebody. We don't see who threw it. Homicide ends up hitting a camera, punching it, and we see it from the camera's perspective, which was really cool. Smokes yells, "Do you want to die tonight?" Punk and Homicide then start getting into a shoving match. Dan Moff starts screaming for everyone to relax, almost doing, again, kind of like almost like a work shoot vibe where it's just like this is Dan Moff the person. Like, he doesn't say this, but kind of has that vibe of just like, everyone stop, please. Most of the talent goes behind the giant curtain they set up in this Ramada conference room, which to designate their backstage area. And then we get this really cool shot where we cut back to the hard camera, like wide shot, where we see a still hurt Jay Briscoe is being attended to in the ring. And then in the background, we see one of these giant draped curtains falling down as we realize they're still brawling behind the curtains in this makeshift backstage area. And one of the curtains is just these giant curtains is just fallen down. Smokes has to be dragged outside the building. He's just losing his mind, screaming at Joe. Joe chases after him, and they have to be held back in the parking lot. And Joe just starts screaming, "I'll put you in the fucking ground." And then Mark Briscoe has to go be held back. And DeVito has this moment where he grabs Mark and he tells him, "Go check on your fucking brother." And Mark goes, "Oh, fuck." Like, he just remembered his brother is hurt, and he runs back into the building. So this went on for a long time. Matt, I know you have thoughts on this. We haven't talked about it, so I don't know what your thoughts are. I felt like this was a cool, chaotic, like, thing. I felt as far as like a makeshift riot, it was definitely like better and more realistic than the second and third. You know, it was on par, maybe even better in some ways than the first Ring of Honor riot. And before I throw it to you, I guess I should know how real it was to some people. So from Mike Johnson, it was an insanely intense brawl with everyone trying to hold back Briscoe. Joe was screaming at Key that he would see him in September. And I'll just pause here and note, I don't know what he's referring to because Joe and Key do not wrestle each other, even in a tag in September, at least for Ring of Honor. So anyway, going back to Mike Johnson. At one point, a chair flung by Key hit referee Paul Turner in the head, knocking him out cold. He was okay afterwards. The intense brawl actually knocked down one of the partitions separating the crowd from the locker room before heading outside the building. They continued outside the building, which led to hotel guests calling the cops. Ring of Honor security had to explain to the police that nothing that wasn't supposed to happen took place. The cops understood and no one got in trouble, although they hung around a while to make sure. So, Matt, this was pretty crazy.
Yeah, there were things that I liked about this. I liked the chaos. I liked, like, in some parts, I liked that moment where the curtain fell down. I thought that was a pretty cool, like, oh, it's over. Oh, shit, no, it's not. Like, I enjoyed that. I never liked the work shoot stuff, really. It always just takes me out of it a little bit. Like, to be like, there's two worlds, and now this is the real one, and that wasn't. Like, it started right after the match because Gabe goes, "How come there's no music?" Like, uh-oh, something is wrong. Like in a horror movie or something, right? And that's when Key walks over to Jay and kicks him in the head. Now, this is another thing that I didn't love about this. I didn't get why that kick to the head, which we see in a million matches, is supposed to be this egregious thing that sets off a riot.
Like, I think that's the biggest problem. It doesn't come off like anything worse than a really stiff, low-key pro wrestling kick. I guess we're supposed to believe because Low-Ki has the reputation for being stiff, and because he did accidentally knock out Dan Moff, but it doesn't come off like that.
Right. He walks over and kicks him hard in the head. There's almost like there's a sound. I don't know if it's like a knee slap or whatever, and Jay gets knocked out. But that's when just things pop off, right? Everything goes crazy. Mark goes after him. Then Punk is like, "I'm getting out of the booth. I'm gonna go help." And they talk about how things are unprofessional and something weird is going on. Like, they say that. Like, I just never liked that stuff. If they hadn't gone there on commentary, I would have been okay with it. But yeah, then everybody coming out, Gabe says we have to go to intermission. This is, by the way, when I notice Frank Talent, I realize in my notes, like, they're all brawling at ringside and Frank Talent just kind of like walks by around the corner of the ring. It's
like another coffee.
Yeah, something like that. At one point, Smoke says, "You want to die?" By the way, you cannot make this seem like a real thing while also having Julius Smokes just overacting the way he does. You know what I mean? Like, I get that he's a character in real life, but like, if there was a real dangerous fight going on, even Julius Smokes, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm an idiot, but that he would just be like, say, like, "You want to die tonight?" and just like being wacky. And Loke goes, "I like that fucking die thing. That's funny." And somebody's yelling, "Everybody relax," which I think is funny because I wasn't sure who was saying it, but it's like, guys, come on, we got to calm down. I enjoyed that. A lot of guys saying they're going to kill each other. I don't know. I thought it was cool in a lot of ways, but it did get confusing at points. Like who was beating up who was the one who was restarting things? Was it Mark? Was it Joe? Was it Low Key? There was a point where like everything's going crazy, and then like you see Homicide get up and like he's like kind of getting calmed down. I'm like, I thought Homicide had gone to the back like 5 minutes earlier. Like it's very confusing, which I guess is maybe part of the vibe. I just didn't like the work shoot stuff, and I don't know. There just wasn't enough of like, why was this happening now? You know what I mean? Like, what caused this? And you said this wasn't meant to write out the Briscoes, right? Like this was just an angle that was supposed to go forward.
I know they were booked for at least like the next show, and they had to cancel because of and clearly I don't think this is how you'd write them out, because if anything, it's setting up like a Briscoes key match, like a Jay Briscoe key match that we never, at least in this era, we don't get. And even I guess that's another one. If you want to look for problems on this, like we got Joe screaming to Low Key, I'll see you in September and all this stuff. Like it's building a lot of. I mean, the Joe Rottweiler's feud in total continues in some ways, maybe I guess, but like, or I don't even know how much more longer that goes on. Like it's building a lot of things that don't happen. Which with the Briscoes thing, maybe that's out of their hands, because Mark gets hurt and they decide to take a break from wrestling, but. Yeah, I like the spectacle of it. I thought it came off as more entertaining and real than some of them, or most of them. But yeah, the whole thing, it's like it kicks off with a thing that you can't buy. Like we're supposed to believe, like I guess in the realm of this, we're supposed to believe that Low Key, after legit losing a pro wrestling match that he you would assume agreed to lose, got so angry because he hardly ever loses that he decided to really kick his opponent in the head for real. Like it's just whatever Low Key's reputation was, it wasn't that,
Yeah, exactly. I just that part didn't work for me. It never is going to, but it definitely didn't here.
But I do think one thing they did better, which was, and one thing that I do think separated it from the other riots, was they didn't have, at least on camera, from what I could see, like Gabe and anyone else out there screaming, like, everybody's like, they let the wrestlers do it, but it wasn't like the first rider stuff where you have like Gabe and Rob come out and be like, this is a shoot, everybody stop. Like, I think that was a step that made it better.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, so I enjoyed it, but yeah, that initial part is not great. And one thing I did like, I have to point out, I loved DeVito trying to restrain Smokes while simultaneously, like, clearly getting a huge kick out of everything Julius Smokes was saying. Like, he's barely holding back a smile while also, like, oh, I'm going to hold this guy back because this is a scary riot. But he's clearly just, like, enjoying getting a front row seat to the Julius Smokes show.
But you know what? I actually buy that in real life, DeVito would have that reaction, even if there was a scary riot going on, to somebody freaking out the way Julius Smokes was.
And I didn't time this, but this, Matt, maybe I'm wrong, but this felt like it went on for a long time, too. Like on a show that really needed to be tightly edited. And again, I'm not necessarily, this isn't even a complaint. It's just interesting. They spent a lot of time, like, on this riot.
But talking about improvements, do you remember on the first anniversary show that they showed the entire thing like 3 times from different angles? We only get it once here. This would have had to have been like maybe a triple DVD set if they showed this 2 additional times, because it did feel long. But... I mean, that was absurd even like when we first reviewed it, right? Like, why are they showing this whole thing again? Yeah. But hey, they really liked it, I guess.
You could tell on that one they were just so proud of, like, look what we did. This is a special thing, and like they were just so excited. And here, I do think they're a bit more reserved in how they do it to their benefit. I think they're a bit more, again, like I mentioned, not having like Gabe come out and scream, oh, this is a shoot and stuff like that. They've learned some lessons.
Just no shrieking during this.
Yeah, they just haven't learned every lesson, but they've learned some with this riot. And again, it's just unfortunate that it doesn't really produce anything that I can remember. But after intermission, there's another thing that didn't make DVD, but likely wouldn't have made DVD even if they weren't pressed for time. But from the Mike Johnson live report, In the first match after intermission, the Rockin' Rebel pinned Cloudy from Special K in 1:41. The Embassy faction attacked Special K, which led to Dunn and Marcos making the save to we're not going to take it. So yeah, this was one of those things where at this time, after Rob had left, Ring of Honor did not have their own Pennsylvania promoter's license, but Rockin' Rebel did. So you'll see a bunch of shows where Rockin' Rebel gets a very short match that does not make tape, because I guess that was one of his stipulations for letting someone use his promoter's license. So congratulations on getting a 1:41 untelevised win over Cloudy. And that brings us to our next match, our first after intermission, Ring of Honor tag team title match. The Havana Pitbulls of Ricky Reyes and Rocky Romero defeated the Second City Saints of CM Punk and Colt Cabana in 19 minutes, 9 seconds when Romero pinned Cabana with a small package. This was a title change. This was the Havana Pitbulls getting the tag belts. Before the match, Punk comes out alone to his usual AFI theme. He seems kind of confused that he's coming out alone. He peeks behind the curtain to look for Cabana. He just eventually gives up and makes his way to ringside by himself. Ace Steel then comes out and he grabs a mic and he tells Punk due to recent events, and for those who don't know, during this week, Rick James had passed away. He says they felt like it was inappropriate for Colt to come out to AFI or Copacabana, and instead Colt comes out to Super Freak, which gets a big reaction. Colt does the hammer dance. Fans love it. Punk does his usual kind of grumpy faced straight man sell.
He goes, I think I need a new partner.
I didn't know this. That's very cool. Julius Smokes dances in Colt's face. Everyone's having a good time. And then we get the match. So, one of the things on this rewatch run, Matt, that I was hoping would change was I remember when the first time I watched these shows at the time, I was pretty disappointed by the Havana Pitbulls because I had heard so much buzz from certain like really harder core than me fans that were watching tapes of, like New Japan and CML where these guys were in and stuff that like, these guys are awesome. These are one of the best tag acts. Even that straight shooting interview with Samoa Joe I mentioned, Joe, who recorded this interview, on this day, said like that he thought this was one of the best tag acts in the world, and he was so excited to see them in Ring of Honor. And so I was really hyped up, and I felt like a lot of their tag matches at the time, I remember feeling like just kind of missed for me. And I felt like, well, maybe this is one of those things that will change on rewatch. And so far, it hasn't. And this is another match where it's not bad. I believe some kids use the term, why do I keep saying kids this episode? I'm 35, I'm not 65. But anyway, some people use the phrase, I believe Joe Lanza of Voices of Wrestling came up with the line, the gentleman's three, for a match where it's technically fairly good and you kind of acknowledge that it's good to some degree. But
that kid Joe Lanza.
Yeah, that kid pushing 40 or, Joe Lanza. But like, the gentleman's three, the idea of, well, I recognize it's good to a certain degree, but it's not really moving me personally. And I think this match for me would be a gentleman's three, where I was never bored at any point during this match. Like most Colt and Punk tags of this era, it follows like a very rock solid traditional tag formula where someone, in this case Punk, gets to be the face in peril. They make the hot tag. You get the final end stretch where everyone's in and out. And I everything makes sense, but everyone in the moment, their work is good, except there's a moment from Punk who does maybe the worst looking surfboard I have ever seen in pro wrestling history, which leads to a funny moment later where Cabana gets one of the guys down, and Punk, you can hear, screams to him, "You show me how to do it." And so Colt tries to fumble at a surfboard and acts like he can't do it. So then he literally just stands on the guy and surfs like he's an actual surfboard. Which
like holds out his arms to the side.
Yeah, like hanging 10. Yeah, and I thought that was fun. But I feel like watching the Havana Pitbulls, people talk about wrestling like the notes between the music, the things you do between the moves. And I don't see a ton of it from the Havana Pitbulls at this point. And while the notes they're doing, aka the moves, are good, they come out a bit robotic. Like they kind of feel like wrestling machines to me at this point. Of just, here's a kick, hard kick,
but not like Austin Aries.
Yeah, like here's a hard kick, here's a move, here's a whatever, and then your turn. Like, I don't know. I kind of feel like them, like some people at some stages of Chris Candido's career, some people said he was a little robotic, or Christopher Daniels. Like, I kind of feel that way about the Havana Pitbulls and some of these early Ring of Honor tag matches where their execution is really good. They're not really doing anything wrong. It's just not connecting with me for some reason. And it's weird. Like, I would say I actually like so far their singles matches in Ring of Honor better than their tags. Like, I prefer the Romero Collier match and the Ricky Reyes Samoa Joe matches to any tags they've had so far, and they've gotten lengthy opportunities with the Briscoes match, with this match, and with the 6-man tag, which was a lot of them in the Briscoes with Joe and Homicide too. Like, they've gotten plenty of time with really top end opponents in Ring of Honor, and I haven't come away one time yet, even on the rewatch, going like, wow, that was even like a 4-star great match. And that's disappointing to me. But I mean, I can go into more details on some things, but I think I should throw it over to you right now. Like, again, this is one of those things where I feel like I don't know if I'm out on a lim or not with this. Like, am I being too hard on this?
Well, I don't think you're being too hard on the match. I actually would go lower than a 3-star for this one. Maybe 2 3/4, like, which is, kind of petty, I guess. But I don't think it would get the gentleman's 3. I didn't think the match clicked. I didn't think it was just the Pitbulls. And I have liked past Pitbulls matches more than you. I know I liked the Briscoes match more than you did. But this match didn't have a lot of heat. It just never really felt like it gelled. There's a little bit of like sloppiness, messiness to it. I didn't think it was Punk's best night. I thought Cabana looked pretty good. But by the way, did Cabana have like an eye injury? Because he was wearing those goggles. I couldn't tell if he was just doing that to be silly or if he actually had an injury. But he was wearing, at least for part of the match. But no, I just thought the match didn't really click right. I think what you say about the Pitbulls makes some sense, and I didn't really think about it, that they're just a little bit robotic, and that I definitely do agree that their singles matches that we've reviewed so far have been more enjoyable than most of these tag team matches. I thought there was some weird stuff. Like, for one thing, I thought it was weird that, like, after all we just saw, they cut away right after it, because remember, this was after intermission. And so, like, there was time in between, but for us, there was no time in between. So we went from Julius Smokes being involved in this insane brawl to just casually, like, dancing out with the Havana Pitbulls. And they sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just wanted to interject because there's a moment in Gabe's commentary where he tries to explain that.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, you should go on, where he says something like, Smokes is there to keep the peace, like, I guess.
Yeah.
It kind of sounded
it was like to appease them, is what he said. Like he kicked out Homicide and Low Key, but he's like, all right, we'll let Julius Smokes stay. That's sort of what the idea was.
Yeah, you can keep your manager. Yeah, that's all I was going to say. But even though that's what he meant, there's just something funny about any time, like, the idea of Julius Smokes is here to keep things settled down. That just, like, the idea of that made me laugh. Like,
Yeah. I agree. Gabe also mentions that it took smelling salts to revive Jay Briscoe, which is like, wow, he was really, really hurt by that little kick. No, I don't know. It looked like a really brutal kick, actually. I'm not making fun of that. But did you notice that Gabe was very careful not to call the Romero and Reyes the Havana Pitbulls? Like, he just calls them the Rottweilers. And, like, even a couple times he starts by saying the Rottweilers. Like, did you notice that?
I didn't, actually. That's interesting. It's funny because when I was listening to that Straight Shooting interview with Samoa Joe, he keeps just calling them the Cubans, which I thought was funny.
That is interesting too.
Yeah.
I guess maybe there was an edict, like, don't call them the Havana Pitbulls. I mean, which feels very Vince McMahon to me, but I guess that must have been what was going on.
Obama had not been around as president yet to open the borders, so
yeah,
very strict. Can't mention the Havana Pitbulls.
Well, they did call them that before they joined the Rottweilers, but yes, I think they just wanted to get over the Rottweilers name. Yeah. Another funny thing you didn't mention about Punk's terrible surfboard, where his foot slips out, is that Gabe says "nicely done" for a second before the foot slips out. He's like, "Nicely done." Oops, like literally, like, if you just waited like a quarter of a second, he would have avoided that embarrassing moment. But I did enjoy that very much. But no, the match, I thought it just was weird. It felt like part of it felt intense, and part of it felt like they were messing around. Do you know what I mean? Like Cabana was being silly, but then there was also this intensity, so the tone felt off. Like I don't know, and then like But then Reyes would do these really hard kicks, so that part didn't seem like messing around, and it never really got that exciting. Reyes spit at Cabana, and Gabe said, "Colt Cabana isn't thinking about Rick James now," and I was just like, what if he still is? Even when getting spit at. And Gabe actually criticizes Colt for the entrance. He's like, when you're with two guys like this, you got to be serious. And I guess, that was setting up the title change. I don't know. I just thought the match had no flow. Eventually, Punk hit the Pepsi twist on Reyes, but then Rocky came in and did that armbar Rana thing that he does. And Punk actually powered out, which you don't usually see Punk get to do, and power bomb him down. But there was some good stuff. Reyes pulling Colt down so Punk tag him. And then once they get the hot tag, I actually enjoyed Colt's hot tag very much because it's super and then Gabe even mentions Jimmy Valiant. He literally just stands in one spot punching the Rottweilers. That's his entire hot tag.
There's one moment where he's waiting on Rocky Romero, I think, to stand up again because he's like, I'm not moving. I'm just waiting for you to get up and take another punch. Like, his plan is just to stand there. You guys keep coming up. I'm going to keep punching you.
Yeah, I agree. And then they do this. They do this thing after the hot tag where they keep putting on these holds right in front of the other partner, like Saints. They do their Boston Crab camel clutch thing on Ricky Reyes, but Romero is just standing right there. So of course he breaks it up and gets Punk in an arm bar, and then Cabana just breaks that up because he's standing right there still. And that, I don't know. That seemed a little bit not the best, not the smartest way to lay out a match. So then Rocky got the armbar on Punk, and Colt broke it up with the frog splash. But he sort of hits the ref, so it's like a mini ref bump. So basically it means that Sinclair isn't out, but he'll have to come from far away to do the counts. And so the guys keep kicking out, which I don't know, I guess it's novel. It's like a half ref bump. And then eventually, Romero goes for the small package. Punk grabs Colt's arm to block it, which I enjoyed. But then Reyes knocked Punk's arm away, and that allowed the small package and the pinfall. So I did like the finish, but I didn't really like the match. I guess the idea was that Cabana wasn't serious enough, and that's why the Pitbulls won. But I don't really think that fits the Pitbulls gimmick, right? That they weren't taken seriously. I thought the idea was that everyone took them seriously and were scared of them. So I don't know what they were really going for. But it was really not the most noteworthy way to change a tag team title.
Yeah, I agree. Although I do disagree on the finish, because actually I really didn't like the finish just for this reason. I like that, Punk holding on to keep Colt from getting rolled up in a small package. But what I don't like is then when his arm gets kicked away and Colt does get small package and that is the finish. I didn't like that for a couple reasons. One, because I feel like small packages usually work as finishes for one of two reasons. Either it's way sudden, so it happens in a flash and the guy wasn't expecting it, or you're facing a guy like Brian Danielson. This is when he had that gimmick where he creates a gimmick of I have an unbreakable small package. And this was a situation where Colt had to know he was potentially getting small packaged for a good 5 seconds or more. And when it finally does happen, I don't think he had taken that much damage in this match because Punk spent most of this match as the face in peril, and he still loses to the small package, which I felt was kind of that's kind of not in my mind, it was that wasn't the time for him to lose to the small package. Going to what you said though, yeah, it does. It's almost like he is not taking it seriously, but again, I don't know if that's was their intended storyline. And that was another weird thing where, Colt's always the wacky guy in a lot of ways, but in the Samoa Joe match, I felt like he did a good job of still coming off as a serious guy for the most part with a little bit of humor. And in this match, he's wrestling with those goggles almost the whole, or glasses, whatever they are, almost the whole match. And like you mentioned, Gabe's criticizing him for not taking anything seriously. It is kind of a weird look where one half of the tag team champions is still wrestling 60% comedy here, Although he does do some serious stuff. He breaks out a cool kind of spinning sidewalk slam I liked. He does his inverted vertical suplex, which I like. He chops the ring post where a guy gets out of the way and hits it really hard, which I thought was cool from him. I also didn't like that Gabe used his sad, like there's been a wrestler death voice when talking about the riot. Again, I felt like the more you try and push it as real, the more fake it seems. Like if you had just let it kind of speak for itself, that's better than like, that riot is just, we got to move on. Like just that hush tone. It's just, you can't lay it on too thick when you're trying making something real. And the only other note I have here is Punk mocks Julius Smokes' hat, which leads to a "that hat sucks" chant. So Punk actually got the crowd to chant against Julius Smokes, which I think is a rare feat in wrestling.
That's right. Punk's face turn is obviously going well.
After the match, Romero put Colt's glasses on Smokes, which was funny, I thought. And then we cut to backstage where Sugar Sean Price is there. He's talking to Moff and Whitmer. And I think I forgot to mention this, but Allison Danger did interfere during the Moff and Whitmer Carnage Crew match.
I mentioned it.
Oh yeah, you did, yeah.
She pulled Moff down and crotched him.
Oh yeah, you did. Thank God.
Thank heavens we didn't miss that one.
Yeah, it's fairly important, but it gives context to this promo. Sean says that Moff and Whitmer have serious woman problems with Allison Danger. Moff tells Allison to let it go. They're leaving her with nothing personal. Moff says they're giving her one last chance. Moff is using his quiet voice here, which I wrote is one of his two voices. And then he refers to her as Kathy, and he goes, "And I say Kathy." And he says he's not a...
He's shooting, just so you know.
Yeah, exactly. And coming off right after the Gabe stuff, it was just a little too much we're being real here stuff. And so he says, I'm not above doing something really stupid if you keep involving ourselves in these matches. So.
I'm not above doing something really stupid. You don't say, Dan Moff.
And like it's also funny, like he's acting like it's the most like don't push me. I'll hurt a woman. Like that was the opening of the first Ring of Honor show. Like
yeah, that's right. Yes, that's exactly right. He hurt her.
Yeah, like it's clearly not like you don't have to be pushed to the absolute moral limit to do this. Like you will do it for shits and giggles. Like it's
you will do it for pure homophobia.
Yeah, exactly. So, but they're continuing this Allison Danger Moff and Whitmer feud. And that brings us to something that's a little weird next.
Wait. Before you get to that,
you go on.
I loved Price's sign-off of that segment. He says, and I quote, "Once again, this is Sugar Sean Price telling you to stay out of their way, and I'll see you guys later." I, cracked up. Like telling you to stay out of the way of Moff and Whitmer. It almost sounded like that was his catchphrase. Like, this is Sugar Sean Price telling you to stay out of their way. Like, I could actually see him ending every segment like that.
If I hadn't, from being so awkward, inadvertently come up with "have a good time, have a great time," which you now make me do at the end of every episode.
I make you.
I think "stay out of Moff and Whitmer's way" would be my new sign-off, just inexplicably, even like when we're covering 2006 Ring of Honor, just stay out of Moff and Whitmer's way.
But also just the way he said it. This is Sugar Sean Price telling you, instead of telling you to have a good time, have a great time. It was like telling you to stay out of their way, and I'll see you guys later. That's how he said it.
It's like the same cadence as only you can prevent forest fires.
That's right.
That was good. I'm glad you made sure I didn't just skip over that. So next we did and we didn't kind of get a Ring of Honor World Title match. This was Samoa Joe defeats Trent Acid via pinfall in 8 minutes 4 seconds after hitting the Island Driver. I guess that's what the live crowd saw, but on the home release, all we see is a very quick edited clip segment of clips. We see, because apparently Trent Acid got hurt during this match, we see Trent Acid do a Hurricanrana, and he lands, and we're told by a voiceover by Gabe that's not trying to act like it's live that Trent hurt himself on this Hurricanrana, and the match didn't turn out to be what it could have been. And they say it is for the interest of time, but also because the match wasn't, what it should have been. We're not going to show most of it. We do see Joe win with the Island Driver, and we see Trent clutching his ankle after the match and really seeming to be in pain. From the Pro Wrestling Torch, there's a bunch of background on this match. The Pro Wrestling Torch said that Ring of Honor World Champion Samoa Joe is so banged up that he had to cancel bookings and other promotions over the previous weekend, but that he was still going to do the Trent Acid match. The Ring of Honor Newswire for July 27th said Joe had suffered a strained knee ligament, a sprained ankle, a black eye, and a bruised tailbone from his 2 matches on Death Before Dishonor weekend. And they were trying to sell that as Trent Acid might not be the underdog everyone thinks on August 7th, which ironically, Trent Acid is then the guy who gets really hurt in this match. The Torch would later write that Trent Acid was taken to the hospital for real after this match. He suffered a sprained ankle and a bruised heel bone, although I read somewhere else that apparently at the time Trent Acid thought he had actually just broken his ankle. And man, I think we talked on a recent show about the kind of one of the tragedies of, obviously there's an obvious tragedy with Trent Acid dying of a heroin overdose or a drug overdose before his time, but one of the other more minor tragedies of Trent Acid was when he started to get a singles run of Ring of Honor in 2004, it felt like his performances in Ring of Honor, for whatever reason, had fallen off a cliff. And this just is another kind of sad part where he gets one of his highest profile matches in the company and he gets hurt. And I think in commentary, Gabe even says something like, Gabe basically acts like they're going to book this again down the line so they can really get a chance to show what they can do. And Trent doesn't get that. He's out of the company by the end of the year, I think is the end for him.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bummer. I don't really have much to say, obviously, about the match because we didn't see it. But I definitely feel bad for Trent Acid. His performances were definitely already going downhill, in my opinion. But I still would have liked to see what he could have done against Joe. I mean, given the opportunity, maybe he would have risen to the occasion. It sucks.
Yeah, and I did think I don't know if you noticed this, but there was one thing in Gabe's commentary. It felt a little pointed to me, even though overall I want to say Gabe didn't come off overall as Gabe burying Trent, because he was saying, we should book these guys again, because we think, they can do a good job and all that stuff. But he did say, I thought this was kind of pointed. Gabe says during the voiceover, the lesson here is to tape up your ankle and wear wrestling gear, which I thought was him kind of saying, like, Trent, you should have taken better care of yourself. It was kind of putting it on Trent, which, maybe that there's some merit to that. But I did think you usually don't hear that in these kind of things where he literally just says the lesson here is to tape up your ankle and wear wrestling gear. But that brings us to the main event, which is best 2 out of 3 falls match. Austin Aries defeated Bryan Danielson 2 falls to 1 in 76 minutes, 10 seconds. Now, one thing I'm going to bring up first is trying to find the match times. I don't usually time these matches myself. I try and look up results. Sometimes the results disagree with each other. This was one of those times where some people timed it out to 74 minutes and change, some timed it out to 76:10. I think that probably depends on whether you include the intermission, where there was supposed to be like a 30-second or so intermission between falls. So I believe probably that has a lot to do with maybe the difference some people had. I'm, for the purposes of this, just going to refer to it as 76:10. Some other people online might say 74, just to let you know if you ever read about this match or time out and go, why did they say that? That's just what I'm going with here. Aries made Danielson submit to the cattle mutilation in 42:08 for the first fall. Bryan Danielson pinned Aries in 63:16 with a pinning combination right after a cattle mutilation for the set to tie it at 1 fall apiece. And then Austin Aries pinned Bryan Danielson in 76:10 after he hit the 450 to win the match, 2 falls to 1. Matt, there's a ton to talk about here, obviously, but thank God you thought of this, because even though I'm supposedly Mr. Research Guy, this completely slipped my mind, and luckily it did not slip your mind. But the man himself, Bryan Danielson, has written about this match, and I believe you have the quote.
Yeah, so this is Bryan Danielson's autobiography, known as Yes, My Improbable Journey to the Main Event of WrestleMania. And it is on page 115 of the original printing, hardcover. So he says, in between tours, I continued to wrestle on independent shows, mostly for Ring of Honor. So he was talking about tours of Japan at that time. Earlier in the year, I won an ROH tournament called Survival of the Fittest, which came down to me and Austin Aries, who just started with ROH a couple of months earlier. Gabe Sapolsky, the booker, loved the finals, and subsequently booked Aries and me in a 2 out of 3 falls match that August at Testing the Limit. I was talking to Gabe on the way to the airport when he told me he'd advertised that each fall had a 1-hour time limit. I thought that was weird, especially since there was no plan for any of the falls to go an hour. It was just going to be like any other 2 out of 3 falls match. But then I started thinking. I envisioned leveraging the significant time limit. We could go to an hour draw in each of the first 2 falls. Then, just when it looked like we were going to going to a third hour-long draw, somewhere around 55 minutes in, Aries would beat me. I called Gabe back and told him my idea. At first he thought I was joking and laughed. But the more I talked to him, the more he realized I was serious. Given the business model of ROH, the most important thing was selling DVDs and tapes. If we did what I had planned, it would be the longest pro wrestling match in modern history, and my justification was that a ton of ROH fans, as well as non-ROH fans, would buy it, even if they fast-forwarded through most of it. Gabe started to come around, and he eventually said I could do it if I wanted to. By just my interjection here, I love that Booker comment. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you want, whatever. When I landed in Philadelphia, I ran the plan past Aries. Gabe had spoken with him earlier, and at first Aries thought he was ribbing him. After he realized it wasn't a joke, it didn't take long for Aries to agree to the concept. My only concern was the live fans and keeping them engaged. Nothing kills a match quite like a crowd that's bored, but I came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. Since we were on last, we would have the ring announcer tell the fans that it could end up being a long match and that neither performer would be offended if an audience member decided to head home. That's right. My brilliant idea was to encourage people to leave in the middle of my match. I thought it would be easier to wrestle the 3 hours if we didn't have to worry about entertaining people live. And I knew the commentary would make it easier for people to watch at home. Unfortunately, people weren't leaving, but they were getting bored, so we improvised and went to our backup plan, exchanging a few falls in what became a 76-minute bout. It is still the longest match of my career, though I've always been disappointed we didn't go the full 3 hours. I think this tells me that there should be a WWE pay-per-view during this pandemic that should just be Daniel Bryan wrestling a 3-hour match against somebody, since there are no fans that they have to entertain. But I thought that was very interesting. Not only that they had that idea, but that he thought of it on the way to the airport, and that Aries agreed of it that day, and they changed their mind in the middle of the match. And Gabe's response was, yeah, whatever.
I'm going to. There's some stuff from people like their opinions on this match. I'm going to save till after our opinions, but I think there's some background on this match that I'm going to put now because I think it actually dovetails really nice with your stuff. Because listening to you read that, the thing I found fascinating about that was so the story about Danielson wanting it to be 2-hour-long draws for the first 2 falls. And then a third fall going about 45 minutes. That all filtered out in the newsletters and like the Observer, the Torch, PW Insider, basically immediately, the week after people were saying this was the story. But the thing I thought was interesting that I learned from you reading that was when I read this, let's see if you think, I think it sounds like the newsletter writers were making it sound like all this was just an idea that came up the day of the show, where the way from what you read, it sounds like this was something that Danielson was fighting for, before, like more than the day of the show.
It's hard. I didn't get that. I got that he said it was on the way to the airport, so I guess it depends on when. It depends on when he was going to Philadelphia, if it was that day or if it was like the day before. But he said he had the idea on the way to the airport when he was talking to Gabe.
Oh, okay. Because think of how I'm saying that is, especially when you think of it from Austin Aries' point of view. Like, imagine what it would feel like to be any wrestler and say, hey, I have an idea. How about we wrestle for almost 3 hours? Like,
well, also just like imagine you're going to work and they're like, hey, just what do you think would be fun if we just did like 3 times the length of our workday?
Yeah, I mean, and also, but like even 3 times the workday, like depending on what your job is, you might know in the back of your head, this will be a killer, but I can do this. I think a lot of wrestlers, I have to imagine, if someone said you have to wrestle for 2 hours, 45 minutes, I think a lot of them would probably say, I don't even know if I can do that.
Right. Like, hey, right. Do you want to wrestle the longest match ever? How does that sound?
Yeah, like I think there's a lot of wrestlers that probably think, I'm not sure if I could go 60 minutes, and Danielson's here saying, hey, do you want to work 2 hours and 45 minutes with me? Like, with hours to go to plan. And it's just, that's like a staggering thing. Like, just, the chutzpah, as they might say.
Right. I mean, it's almost like I mean, I don't know if Aries has ever spoken about like what he thought about that, but it's like that's such a Bryan Danielson thing to do. But then to like assume that somebody else is game for it, you know what I mean? Like, I guess Aries agreed because he was like a young up and comer, but like, boy, it takes a special talent to work the longest match ever. And I guess like the idea was, okay, this is going to be boring, just so you know, but it'll sell DVDs. I mean, that is kind of what it sounded like his idea was. Like, I know this match is going to be boring, but it will sell DVDs. That's basically what he said. People will fast forward through most of it. That's what he said.
And Bryan Danielson is such a fascinating guy because you think of, like, he's such a weird mix of self-deprecation, and he's a very modest guy in a lot of ways, but he also does have extreme confidence in himself in other ways. Like, you hear these stories of like Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit where they would criticize their own great matches right afterwards, and they'd be really hard on themselves, or they would never think they were very good. But like Danielson has some stuff where he is hard on himself in some ways. He's like, oh, I'm not close to the greatest wrestler and all this, and this guy's way better, and this guy's way better. But then he also has this, you do have to have a certain kind of insane confidence to go, yeah, I can do 2 hours and 45 minutes. Like, I definitely can do that, and I can pull it off. Like,
again, it's not, and again, it's not just like a regular kind of confidence that he could do a long match. No one else had done this. Right, no one. I mean, I know like George Hackenschmidt against Frank Gotch, whatever, but like, so that was a totally different thing. You know what I mean? Like, totally different time, totally different place, totally different art form. This is a whole, like, no one had ever done what Bryan Danielson was proposing to be done right here.
The thing that came closest was the year before. CM Punk and Chris Hero had done a 93-minute. I believe it was a 2 or 3 falls match in IWA Mid-South. And that was considered like a huge calling card match, and a huge, even from a small promotion like IWA Mid-South, that was one of the first times I really heard about those guys, because I wasn't really following Ring of Honor regularly yet. This was early in his ROH run when he did this for IWA Mid-South. So again, reminder, Bryan Danielson wanted to do a match that was over an hour and 10 minutes longer than that.
Right. And by the way, that match holds up pretty well in my opinion, and it is available on YouTube for free. The CM Punk versus Chris Hero 2 out of 3 falls 90-minute match. So I recommend that one, for the record.
Yeah. Part of me wonders if that played into Danielson's thinking, because I think he's always like a big ideas guy, and I think he always likes new things and new challenges. So I wonder if part of him in the back of his head was like, if they can do 93 minutes, well, I can do another hour.
Well, it also made it sound like he's like, hey, you gave those hour-long time limits. I might as well like use that to do something different. You know, that was part of it too. But also, long matches were all the rage at this time, right? You already had I mean, if you look, pretty much every ROH show since Generation Next, since that we've reviewed, has had a really, really long match, right? Like, the Generation Next tag team match was like 40-something minutes almost, or close to it. The Survival of the Fittest main event was around 40-ish minutes. The main event of a World Title Classic, obviously, was an hour. The main event of Reborn completion was at least like high 20s, right? Like, or 30 something. Mm-hmm. The Briscoes versus Punk and Cabana 2 out of 3 falls match was really long, and the Punk and Steele versus Moff and Whitmer street fight was really long. So it's like really long matches were like the thing to have at this point in 2004.
And I think this match and the Punk Joe hour-long draws, I think, kind of set off a trend of longer matches in the indies, period. Like, I think other promotions tried to emulate this in part because I think these matches got a lot of attention.
I think you can credit Punk with a lot of it, because he did a really long match against Hero in 2002, a ladder match, and then he did that 90-minute match with Hero. I think he might have done some 60-minute matches even with Cabana, if I remember correctly.
He said in some interview once that he did. I don't know if those are on tape anywhere or anything. They're certainly not remembered like the others, but he claims that he had done 60 minutes multiple times before Joe with multiple people.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's one of the guys who popularized it. Even Joe and Danielson have a super long match in a couple months in ROH. So those long matches are not going away anytime soon. I think they settled down a bit in 2005, but 2004, that's like the thing to do.
In fact, I think there's a story. I forget if they did this or not. I think they did, but I remember like there's a shoot interview. It's a pretty entertaining shoot interview. I think it's an ROH one where it's AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels together going over their entire career of matches just between the two of them and their friendship. And I think PWG in this era was like once like, all right, we booked you guys against each other. We want you to go to a 60-minute draw or something. And they're like, what? Like they did not want to do it. But I think there was a vibe around this era where after some of these matches where it was just like having a match that was 60 minutes or more was the thing to have for a little while. And maybe not
Definitely.
always in a positive way. And again, I think largely, like you said, Punk and maybe a little bit this match too were the influence of a lot of that. But going to what other people wrote about the Danielson story before we get into the review, the Observer wrote, they teased a long match when they announced that all three falls would individually have a 60-minute time limit, as opposed to being the time limit for the match as a whole. Match was said to be to have been 3 3/4 stars to 4 stars. Crowd gave them a standing ovation and chanted 3 more falls at them. Aries kept up with Danielson and went over at the end. They did a limited amount of high spots, but the crowd wasn't as behind Aries at the level they were Paul London when he wrestled Danielson in one of Ring of Honor's best matches last year. Danielson now books all of his matches in Ring of Honor since he's not around as a regular and can only work between New Japan tours. His idea, which is why they announced those rules, was to actually do a 170-minute match with 2 straight 60-minute draws, and then Aries would finally pin him for the third and only fall at the 50-minute mark. When in the ring, Danielson called an audible, thinking the match wasn't working the way he liked. There were periods where the crowd wasn't quiet, but worse, that you could hear the murmur of people carrying on conversations with each other, which meant they weren't enraptured by the match. Gabe Sapolsky felt afterwards that to do a 170-minute match, you would have to have a crowd by invitation only with about your most hardcore 80 fans or so. So there's a lot to talk about there, Matt. First off, I don't think that idea would work pretty well. Like, it would just be weird to say, we're going to tell you in advance this match is going to be really long. Like,
Well, I guess they do that. I guess they do that. Like they have Iron Man matches and stuff. What if they had a 180-minute Iron Man match?
yeah, I wonder how many tickets that would sell. I mean, I would be interested even as a curiosity. Like, I don't know but it is interesting. And it is interesting kind of going to what you said earlier, the way you talked about, like, Gabe was willing to do something he didn't fully believe they could pull off. Because you have Gabe in this comment telling the Observer this was like the week after the show. I think the only way you could do a 170-minute match was, by invitation only with the hardest of the hardcores.
And Danielson even admitted Gabe's reaction was fairly ambivalent. It sounded like when he had the idea, he was like, I mean, I guess he had faith in Bryan Danielson, but he was like,
Yeah.
if you want to do it, go ahead, whatever. Like that really does sound like what it is.
I mean, that shows you the faith he had in him, because how many other guys would he have done that before where it sounds like, he did not believe he could really do this, but in a way, at least part of him must have been like, well, maybe you can, or maybe I just want to make you happy.
Which is honestly how I would have reacted too. Like, he probably can't do this, but like, hey, you know what? It's Bryan Danielson. Maybe he can.
Yeah. I have to think that's this is a pass he gave Danielson. I can't imagine there's if maybe anyone else in that company Gabe would have done that for. Like, I don't know. If Alex Shelley, no offense to Alex Shelley, who I like a fair bit, but if Alex Shelley said, hey, Gabe, how about we try doing a main event I'm in like 170 minutes, Gabe's not saying, sure, go for it.
No, you're right. I think pretty much just Danielson. I mean, I guess maybe Joe or Punk, maybe, but
Yeah.
probably just Danielson.
And the other thing I thought was interesting about that Observer excerpt was there's that line that says, and I don't know what Dave quite means there, where he says Danielson books his own Ring of Honor matches. Like, I don't know if that's Dave just speaking in Dave-ese and it doesn't really mean anything, because even that excerpt you read, it sounded like Brian was talking about Gabe booking him in the Aries rematch like it wasn't his idea. Where if you just read Dave's thing, it kind of sounds like that Brian is booking, like choosing his own matches, where instead this is more just of Danielson having a lot of influence on how the matches worked. But I don't think it's. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Gabe. I don't know what Dave is trying to suggest.
No, that sounds more right to me, right? That not that he books what matches he's going to be in, but rather he's like he lays out the matches pretty much and decides them on his own. That's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I imagine a lot of the top Ring of Honor wrestlers probably had a lot of creative freedom in that respect. Like I imagine Joe and Punk probably had a similar degree of creative freedom to. I mean, we know they do because when we covered their first Joe versus Punk match, the 60-minute draw was CM Punk's idea. It wasn't Gabe's idea, and Gabe then, to his credit, like listened to it and agreed to go with it. So this idea, again, it kind of the way Dave writes, it kind of makes it sound like Danielson has this special power where I think Gabe has a history of listening to guys, and if he thinks they have a good idea, like letting them work it, especially if they're a top name that has proven that they have a lot of talent to be able to pull off somewhat audacious ideas.
Yeah, and it's a mark of a good. That's a mark of a good booker, also.
Yeah, and the PW Torch actually got a quote from Gabe on this. Ring of Honor booker Gabe Sapolsky tells the Torch about Danielson's request. Bryan Danielson requested to have time to do a long match, he says. When a talent like Bryan Danielson makes that request and a talent like Austin Aries agrees, you give them the stage. Ring of Honor is all about letting the wrestlers perform their art on the best stage possible, so when Danielson and Aries want to do something memorable and special, you don't tell them no. The Torch writes, only a few fans left during the match, but those who remained gave the wrestlers a standing ovation and chanted Match of the Year, hardly an uncommon occurrence at the end of a Ring of Honor event these days.
It's weird that the people gave him a standing ovation Match of the Year, but that the range that Dave Meltzer got in his reports was 3.5 to 4 stars. Like that's I'm not saying that they were like wrong or right or whatever. I'll get to my review, but it's surprising that like the crowd reacted so dramatically, but none of those people wrote into the Observer to give a rave review.
Yeah, I have some definite thoughts on that first, but this is definitely going to be probably the longest review we've done for a single match, at least since Homicide Carino in the first match they had.
Bitter friends, differ enemies.
Which was the Through the Years official best match of 2003, by the way, in case you want a reminder that match is great. But, it warrants it because there's so much to talk about. But I think finally, Matt, we can get to what did you think about the actual match they had?
I thought this match was, so I'll get the headline out of the way. I thought the match was absolutely fantastic with flaws. That is how I would describe this match. It was a great match that had some noticeable flaws. It's going to be hard for me because I wrote down a lot. It's going to be hard for me not to just like veer into just pure play-by-play, and I'm going to try to avoid that, but I'm going to probably do a little bit of that as I kind of like hit some high points. So for one thing, the beginning of the match, because I think the easiest match to compare this to is the match at the Epic Encounter between London and Danielson. And that match, I would say, was flawless. Would you agree that was sort of a flawless match in terms of how they executed it and how it went?
Yeah, I mean, even Dave in that Observer quote I read, they were comparing it. Everyone, I think, was comparing it to that match because it's a 2-out-of-3 fall match with Danielson. And that match, I think a lot of people, or some people, consider that the greatest match Ring of Honor had ever done up to that point.
Yeah, and it was, I would say, flawless. And at the beginning of that match, it had an incredible atmosphere, like the beginnings of the double chants, and you had mentioned on the review that we did a long time ago. The chanting culture in ROH started with that match. This match did not have anything close to that atmosphere at the beginning. The crowd, they were going slow. The crowd knew it, right? So they were doing the slow start, which was logical because the guys were cautious. It's 2 out of 3 falls. It makes sense. Aries won't shake hands at the beginning, which, is smart, with the coronavirus and everything. But they do, they do the mat wrestling and stuff. Danielson even gets on a cattle mutilation for a split second early, and a guy screams about 6 minutes in. He goes, 2 hours and 54 minutes left. So again, you can really hear individual crowd members on this show. So, they're wrestling, they're working on stuff, and even, it's slow, it's methodical. Punk even mentions that it's a defensive style of wrestling. So at first, Danielson is targeting Aries' arm. Then it looks like Aries might be targeting the back. Daniels breaks out, "I have till 5, referee," and he does that multiple times in a row, which was always enjoyable. It feels almost like Danielson is working like more of a heel than Aries is at certain points in this match. I don't know if that ever felt apparent to you.
Oh, definitely. I made a note where it was an interesting choice. Like he's jawing with the crowd a couple times. He doesn't he do something that's outright cheating at one point? I forget what he does.
Yeah, I'll see if I have it in my notes, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But he's doing the "I have till 5" stuff.
Oh, sorry. He grabs the ropes during an abdominal stretch.
That's right. He grabs it during an abdominal stretch. And Aries, other than the handshake, right, he's sort of the plucky underdog, right? Like, even though he's a total heel in terms of characterization right now in the company, he's basically the baby face here. So like I said, he starts working out on the arm, but then he works on the neck, then he works on the back, and Punk thinks that Danielson is like feeling Aries out to find an opening. And, we sort of see that's sort of what he's doing, but I think what he's really doing is just like wearing every single part of Aries' body down bit by bit. So, which is a strategy we don't see too often. But, in a 70-something minute match, I guess you could do that. Danielson goes up top and Aries hits a top rope Rana. And then he hits a drop kick to the face and a kick to the back for 2. So Aries is starting to take over a little bit. He's getting his comeback. Aries even blocks a cattle mutilation and puts Danielson in the fish hook, and Danielson rolls out into a cover for 2. And now we're getting like 20 minutes in, and the crowd is starting to get the dueling chants going. The atmosphere is building a little bit. Aries goes for another top rope Rana, but Danielson lifts him out into a fireman's carry and jumps off the top with a gutbuster, almost like Roderick Strong style. So that's a pretty big move for like less than 20 minutes in. It's probably the first real big move of the match. But still no clear strategy is emerging. But Danielson is jawing with the referee. He knocks Aries to the floor with a drop kick. He's definitely been the dominant one in the first fall. And they're doing something. One thing that is similar to the London match is Danielson is really cranking on these holds, making them look really brutal, digging his arm into different places and his fist in, and Aries is like struggling hard against it. And, he puts on an abdominal stretch, the one that you were talking about where he grabs the rope, but he's really, really working it, like he's just like cranking and like moving and like he's not just like sitting in it. So it's like it does seem like they're intentionally trying to get sympathy for Aries, and he hip tosses out of that abdominal stretch, but he gets hit with a clothesline. And the crowd claps for Aries, and this is what you mentioned, right? Danielson goes, "Stop that clapping. You stop that clapping now," which is, I don't know, pretty funny. So now Danielson has moved to Aries' ribs and his midsection. So he's sort of proving Punk's theory correct. He gets on a seated abdominal stretch, and Aries tries to escape, but Danielson, by hitting Danielson in the head with his knee, but Danielson just cranks down and digs his elbow into Aries' side. Like all of that, like cranking and like little like maneuvers, that's what makes Bryan Danielson different than other wrestlers. Most guys wouldn't be doing all that stuff. And Daniels, he does a crucifix for a pinfall. Aries is finally able to backdrop Danielson to the outside to get a breather. Hits the twisting plancha, and he finally gets control. And he puts on what Punk calls a royal octopus hold. I'm so bad with names, I probably wouldn't have known that. I guess partially because American announcers rarely call the moves by their like real names. But Danielson gets out by biting Aries' thigh, which, again, you just do not see that. So I wrote here, they're doing a lot, but the pace is definitely methodical. But they're definitely doing a lot. So eventually, Danielson gets a slingshot suplex, gets a 2 count. He does like a cranking hold, and Punk says it's almost a version of Tenzan's Anaconda Vice. So I guess that's where Punk got the idea to make that his finishing hold, because he debuts that probably a few months later, right, as his finisher?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting between this and that Kenta mention Punk made earlier. He's like telegraphing his future. He's like, that Kenta and that Tenzan, they have some pretty cool moves. Like
Yeah, I know. But like, you're not no joke. Like, clearly he was into those guys and he took their moves.
yeah.
Took a little bit longer for him to do the go to sleep. He didn't do the go to sleep until OVW, right?
I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it would have been weird if he had done it in Ring of Honor,
Or maybe not even until ECW. But Danielson holds down Aries and drives knees into his lower back, and he's really focused on that area now. And I wonder if I was wondering, like, at this point, if Danielson was still planning on going 2 hours and 55 minutes. But he goes for another slingshot suplex. He shifts his weight, falls on Danielson for two. And I couldn't tell if that was a botch or if that was on purpose. But Danielson got the airplane spin, stopped it, reversed it, and he went for a headbutt, and the crowd chanted, "Watch your head." And I wrote, yeah, in more ways than one, because we know how dangerous that move is. We just watched the Chris Benoit documentary. We also know that Danielson has had concussion issues. So yeah, dude, watch your head. But Aries rolled out of the way. Both guys are down. Dragon blocked the brainbuster and hit a Golden Gate swing, shades of Donovan Morgan. And then Aries hits the moonsault block. Danielson tries to roll through, but Aries rolls it into a pinning combo. Aries went up top. Daniels caught him. They did a "Please Don't Die" chant, just as an homage to the London match, I guess. And Danielson yells, "I don't give a fuck if I die or not."
Did that make you like going to Danielson's, like, you thought about Danielson's head stuff during the watch your head thing when he says I don't give a fuck if I die or not? That's when I kind of thought back to, like, that's probably the mindset that's gotten him in. I'm sure that was part of just in character, but that kind of took me out of the match for a second, where I was like, that's kind of the mindset that's gotten you into some bad places, my friend.
However true that sentiment was at the time, I don't think he feels that way anymore.
No, I mean, he has a wife and a kid. He's talking about maybe really basically almost retiring, maybe wrestling once a month or something. So yeah, clearly he is not Mr. I don't give a fuck if I die or not.
No, definitely not. And I wish him all the best. I hope he stays safe and stays healthy.
Me too.
So Danielson goes for the back suplex, but Aries reverses it into a pinfall. Then Danielson rolls into his own pinfall, and Aries kicks out. I really feel like this is the point where the match really starts to get really good. Like, unlike with the London match where the intensity was there right away, they really built it to the end of this first fall. Aries goes for the small package. Danielson reverses it, and Aries kicks out. Aries gets a backslide by two. A backslide for two, then a crucifix bomb, then the rings of Saturn. Then he does the full Nelson cattle mutilation, like the one that Danielson used to beat Low-Ki. And Danielson actually taps out. And I thought, like, the first fall, it kind of started like, where's this going? But everything looked good. But that finish to the first fall I thought was great. And I thought it was an upset for Aries to win after taking so much damage, because Danielson was in control for most of that. So in some ways, it actually was kind of similar to the first match, but the first 2 out of 3 falls match. But I thought that it ended up being a really good first fall. I don't know if you want to save your thoughts to the end, or if you want to do each fall.
I can do a little bit of my thoughts. I thought the first fall. Well, actually, maybe I should save my thoughts to the end, unless you need a break from talking.
No. I can
Okay.
go. I can do it. I'm losing my voice, but I can do it.
Yeah, this match is like this match is so long. It's an endurance test just to podcast about it.
Yeah, I feel like, what was that finish? That was like the high 20s, right? The 30-minute mark, something like that, right? Maybe even later, maybe even 40 minutes.
It was later. I can go back and look. Let me just scroll back up on this crappy wireless keyboard.
And this was clearly after Danielson had decided to call his audible. And by the way, I didn't think the crowd was bad. I thought the crowd got more into it as it went along. At least that's how it seemed on video. At least at this point.
The first fall was 42 minutes 8 seconds in.
Yeah,
so they went deep before they even went to the first fall.
But the crowd was not dead at that 42-minute mark. They were into all those near falls and stuff. They drink water in between, and Punk says that it's cheating, because he's like, I didn't get that in my 60-minute match, which, fair enough.
Yeah, he says next time I want something like Gabe says something like maybe next time you'll have a 2 out 3 falls match or something, and when you face Joe, and Punk says something I want water next time and a fruit plate. He says,
Yeah, well, you know what? He deserves that fruit plate.
yeah,
So Aries picks up. He goes after Danielson's head and neck, and he goes up top. Danielson pushes him to the outside, all the way onto a chair in the corner of the ringside area, and into the guardrail. So that was pretty rough. And then Danielson's going after Aries' leg, and Gabe's like, "This is what happened in the epic encounter, right?" He goes after the leg after losing
yeah.
the first fall, which is true. There is definitely some symmetry there. And Danielson's throwing the leg into the guardrail. And a fan says to him, "I thought you were a gentleman." So Danielson just looks at him and does like the regal pose where he puts his arm behind his back and puts two fingers in the air.
Yeah.
So he goes back in the ring and gets that half crab on, the one that he pinned London, or not pinned, made London submit to. But Aries reverses it into a roll up. Dragon does the Indian Deathlock, pretty much every hold in the book he does. Aries struggles the whole time, which I thought is a really good touch. Like, he's just not letting Danielson put these holds on. He's struggling and struggling. And Danielson actually bridges back on the Indian Deathlock, which gets a big pop from the crowd and from Gabe. And then Danielson turns it over. So what makes the Indian Deathlock, I guess, different from the figure four is that you could turn it over and you're still the one controlling the hold. But Aries gets to the rope. They really worked that Indian Deathlock. I really appreciated that. Like, they did every single thing to make that Indian Deathlock entertaining the whole time.
That was awesome.
Yeah. He uses his legs to flip Aries over the top to the floor. And he goes, so this is a big moment. He goes for a tope, misses, hits the floor. Gabe yells, "Dangerous!" which gives away that it's an injury because, missing a dive happens all the time. Like, you would not have watched that dive and been like, "Oh no, this is an injury angle," right? Like, but Gabe yelling "dangerous" made it seem like it was, and then of course they sold it like it was. So this was almost a little bit of like work Nostradamus Gabe here, where he knew immediately it was an injury instead of being like, "Oh no, he's not getting up." So Danielson is down for a really long time, and Aries can't get him up, and he goes, "Is this guy just going to lay here for the rest of the night, or what?" I thought he laid there for so long that I was like, shouldn't the ref just stop the match? Like, it didn't make sense to me that they just let it go like that.
Well, Aries is even complaining at one point. He's like, the match should be stopped, and then at one point when he's trying to get Danielson back in, he's even telling the ref, like, you help me get him in then. Like, he's dead weight. Like, he's really complaining and getting mad about like the situation they're in.
Even the announcers are like, they should probably just like disqualify him. Like, he's letting too much go. I thought this was a major flaw in the match, personally. Like, this took me out of it a little bit. Like, I get why they did it. It's probably like a little bit of a breather, a break in the drama of the match, a new angle to let let Aries take over more and change the course. But I think if they had just cut like 3 to 4 minutes off of the length of this, it would have been less egregious to me. I don't know. But Danielson does come to. Aries throws him shoulder first into the post. Aries does like a flipping splash and a cabrata for 2. And Danielson fights back with uppercuts, but Aries remains in control. So he's keeping the control here. So Aries goes to elbow Danielson, but Danielson moves and Aries elbows the post. Like, he puts Danielson right up against the post and does the elbow. I thought that made Aries look kind of dumb. Like, why would you do that right there? So where, like, if you moved, you would definitely hurt yourself. So this puts Danielson back in control, working on Aries' arm. But Aries does hit the brainbuster and his big swinging elbow, and that feels like a big moment. The crowd really is into that, but he only gets 2. And we are officially past the hour mark here. Aries escapes another brainbuster attempt and goes for the cattle mutilation, takes him down from the knee, which was right after Punk suggests it, and hooks the hold. And Danielson turns it into a roll-up then, like, where he'll do the cattle mutilation, flip back, roll up the arms, sit on the arms, and get the 3 count. And that makes it one against one. I thought the second fall was a mixed bag. I thought that Indian Deathlock was one of the highlights of the match, honestly. I thought that was so cool. I really did not like the Danielson injury spot. So I don't think overall I liked the second fall as much as I liked the first fall. So the third fall is a bit different. The crowd is up for it. Like, they just go all out. They're hitting hard shots. Aries fights off a superplex attempt and hits a big top rope DDT that gets holy shit chants. The crowd is absolutely awake at this point. Like, there's no question. They are into this. It's not like the hottest crowd of all time, but they're absolutely into it. They're dueling chances. Aries hits a series of body slams the way Danielson did at Survival of the Fittest. He does 3, but then Danielson escapes the 4th one and hits a bunch of his own. And Danielson's are harder hitting than Aries, to the point where he actually falls down after delivering one. I like that. Like Aries is trying to do a Danielson thing, but Danielson basically just shows him how it's done. On the 5th body slam attempt, though, Aries rolls him into a small package for 2. Then Danielson goes to the bear hug. So if you remember from Survival of the Fittest, he won by getting the bear hug and then almost like turning him over into almost like a Boston Crab type position in the bear hug. And Punk notes that all the body parts Danielson worked on made it hard for Aries to get out of the bear hug because he can't, power out with his arms. His neck is weak. His ribs are weak. So it's like he built up to that bear hug spot. But Aries actually reverses it. Like he turns it into his own bear hug, which can you think of another match where you've seen a bear hug reversal spot? Or like a bear hug reversal as like a big high spot?
No, I mean I've seen bear hug. The bear hug gets broken a lot, but
right.
Reversed into something else. I got nothing I can bring to mind.
Yeah, like and then Danielson reverses it back and tries turning it into that Boston Crab bear hug, but Aries grabs Danielson's ears and pulls himself up by Danielson's ears and headbutts him out of the hold. So one thing you can say about this match, there are spots in this match that I have never seen in any match ever besides this match. Pulling yourself out of a position by a guy's ears is one of those. And this is one of the things that I really appreciated about this match. They were just doing stuff you've never seen before. Not exclusively, but even the trading of body slams. Like that's a thing that you don't see really, right? Danielson does hit the big belly to back superplex. Aries kicks out and Danielson goes back to the cattle mutilation. Aries gets his feet on the ropes. Danielson goes for another belly to back, but Aries knocks him off the top rope, goes for a 450. Danielson rolls and Aries lands on his bad knee, and Danielson charges like he did once in a Survival of the Fittest, but Aries this time avoids it. He doesn't get the shoulder block. He avoids it and turns it into a backslide, which gets 2. Then they both bounce off the ropes, trading forearms. Danielson grabs the leg and takes Aries down, but Aries kicks him in the head, and both are down, and the dueling chants come again. Danielson pops up with the big roaring forearm, but then collapses again. And then Danielson gets up, but Aries pops up with his own roaring forearm, and then he collapses. He hits a super brainbuster off the ropes, and Danielson actually kicks out. Then Aries hits 2 more brainbusters. Then he does the 450, but before he does it, he touches the overhang to demonstrate how low the ceiling is. But he hits it. He gets the win. I thought the 3rd fall was superb. I thought it was one of the, if you just take that fall, that's a 5-star fall in my opinion. The match itself, I wouldn't put up at that level because I did think there were some flaws, especially in that 2nd fall. But I thought they did a really good job. I thought it was innovative. I thought it was a great, great match. Not the match of the year, but I found it incredibly impressive.
First, Matt, I just want to say, you did a great, great review there, and I felt for you having to talk that long. And I'm now going to hopefully give you quite a bit of a break, and I hope I can do anything close to as good as that. But
thank you.
There's a lot to say here. So I guess there's 2 I almost feel like there's 2 reviews. There's the review of the match that happened, and there's reviews of the nature of long matches in general. I'm going to go over the match first, and then maybe we can talk a bit about just some things I have to wonder about how people feel about long matches. But my overall thoughts first. I guess I'll do my overall thoughts first, like you, and then go into more detail. Matt, I'm going to use one of my classic Trevor Dame food analogies, and I swear to God, I am not 500 pounds. Not that there's anything wrong with being 500 pounds, except the obvious medical problems. Keep in touch with your doctor. It's just the way my brain works. But
yum.
This match, Matt, is there's in the world of you're a vegetarian, Matt, because you're a better person than me. But in the world of things like meatloaf and stuff, there's the idea of a really good meatloaf requires some bread in the meat mix to make it into a meatloaf for texture reasons, moisture reasons, all sorts of things. You make what you would call a panade, Matt. You soak some bread in some liquid, usually some milk, put that into the meatloaf mix. Now, cheap meatloaf, they will sometimes call it prison meatloaf or things like that. it uses a lot more bread, or in some cases cracker crumbs, to kind of stretch out the meat. You get a bigger meat, you get more meatloaf without having to spend so much money on meat, because more of the meatloaf is cheap bread, cheap crackers. Now, the thing people look down that meatloaf, because it's not because bread tastes bad or crackers taste bad. They taste good, but they're not taste as good as meat. And so the idea is people look down those meatloaves because it's like you're diluting what's the real great part of this, which is the meat. Now, when I look at this match, Matt, it is a prison meatloaf where everything in this match is good to great. And there was a ton of great in this match. But the problem is there's there's a bunch of breadcrumbs in this match, more than it needs. I feel like you talked about the third fall being a 5-star fall. I think in this 76-minute match, there is a 45-minute match that would be remembered as one of the greatest Ring of Honor matches of this era. But there is also then another, half an hour of breadcrumbs. There's a half an hour of things that are all entertaining to some degree or not. There's nothing that's bad in this match at all, but it's things the match didn't need, and it's diluting the impact of the whole match. And it's diluting, I think, how excited the crowd would be into it. Like, you go to that third fall, again, jumping ahead, that third fall has a ton of callbacks to the first match, and it has a ton of epic moments where guy hits a move and they're both selling for a long time, and the crowd's giving it a fairly good reaction, but you can tell they're losing some energy. And even Gabe on commentary acknowledges that the crowd's starting to get exhausted. And I felt bad for the guys because they did not get the reaction some of those near falls, which were fantastic, deserved, and some of those moments in that third fall, because the crowd was exhausted, because they had padded out the match with good stuff, but for the sake of making a long match. And that's kind of the way I feel. This is like a forced, in my opinion, like, people are throwing on star ratings. Dave said live reports at 3.5 to 4. We'll give ratings later of what other reporters thought. I'll just say I would give this like a 4 stars, but I think there is a 5-star or close to 5-star match in this match that is then extended past that. And because of that, I have to give it more of a 4-ish. But there are so many great moments, and you've gone over so many of them. There are a ton of great moments and callbacks and like you said, inventive things. This wasn't just guys doing every move they ever have done in once in their life and remembering it. These are guys like doing really inventive things just for this match. Like Danielson in particular doing a lot of reacting to the crowd at different moments in ways you mentioned. Like, there is so much just really smart thought put into this match, but it's too long. It's 76 minutes. That's too long. There's a reason, like, it's the difference between eating 4 slices of pizza and being forced to eat 3 large pizzas. The pizza's still great. It's just too much pizza. But going over to the match until like its parts, that first fall, it's over half the match. And that's probably a lot of what you could cut out in the match is in that first fall. I thought it built well, but a lot of that early mat work, even though it's really good mat work and I enjoy mat work, you could have cut out without really hurting the story of the match. Like, looking at my notes, I think we're somewhere between 14 and 16 minutes in before what the commentators refer to as like the first big high impact move of the match. And I think it's 38 minutes in before we get a near fall that the crowd really pops for in a huge way. And I think that's one point to bring up is, in some ways, like, the fact that they announced every 15 that there'd be 60 minutes per fall would be the time limit, and every 15 minutes of this match they did the time cue where they said 15 minutes has elapsed in this fall. I think that might have been a mistake, because I think that telegraphed it was going to be a long match. And like you said, just the way they were working let everyone know right from the get-go it was going to be a long match. But I think that didn't help. And we've seen in other matches, I think, when you let fans know right from the start it's going to be a long match, the fans kind of pace themselves too.
Well, in the London match, they did that, but the crowd was so invested in Paul London that it didn't make that much of a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. That is an exception. I still think more often than not it hurts, but no, it can be overcome. I think what we can say is they didn't overcome it in this match. I do think the crowd was very tipped off early on that it was going to be super long, and the crowd was never out of this match. They did dueling chance throughout parts. They never felt like they turned on the match. They got loud for some parts that were big moments, but I will say a lot of this match there was murmuring. I didn't necessarily do it as bad murmuring, but just this was a match where a lot of times it was spread out, and the crowd was also not. They were not going to scream their head off or be super loud and focused in every moment.
But you're right. But I do want to mention, I have seen ROH matches where I have noticed like that the crowd was quieter than this by a lot in main event matches that are considered great. Like, for example, the Danielson versus AJ Styles match from Main Event Spectacles, where Gabe actually decided he was going to not do commentary. I remember thinking the crowd was not that good for that match. They were not that up for it. And I thought they were actually more up for this one. Similarly, the War of the Wire. Right? Remember we talked about how crappy that crowd was? But people don't usually use that as points against the match. And I find it interesting that a lot of people notice it in this match in a way that I guess I just didn't. I don't know.
And we can't speak for every fan because according to that one report, a few fans did leave during this match. So obviously there were some fans where you didn't hear their displeasure because they left the building. They didn't stick around. But going to what you said, I think a good way to put that would be we've seen matches that are like less than half the length of this that the crowd was quieter for or outright turned on. That's because it was too quote unquote slow. And this crowd did not do that for a match that was far, far longer. So that is to the crowd's credit and it is to their credit. So you get the first fall and it builds, Danielson does work the heel stuff for Danielson. It's an interesting choice where he's jawing with the crowd. He's holding on to it's interesting because Aries was the heel in Ring of Honor at this point. Danielson was always pretty loved, whenever he came back. And Aries was, part of Generation Next, the cocky, cheating heel stable. And so it was kind of, I thought, a weird choice, even though I liked the stuff Danielson did do that was heelish. It also kind of melted away, I felt like, as the match went on. Like, about halfway through when the match starts getting more, we're getting into bigger stuff, it's getting, deeper into the match, Danielson kind of just drops whatever healer stuff. Early on, he's doing the I have till 5. He's doing the cheating with the abdominal stretch. There's a certain point in the match where he just turns that off for whatever reason.
It's almost like Danielson was doing it to amuse himself.
Yeah. There's so much of this match I would love to ask Daniel Bryan about, or I keep calling Daniel Bryan even though he's Bryan Danielson. But like, I would love, for example, like you referenced it, like I would love to know if he remembers when in his head he decided to change this match from the 2 hours and 40 plus minute thing he was planning on. Like, I would love to know if there was a specific moment where he just said, something's going on here, something's not getting the reaction I need to. This is where we need to start changing things. Like, it's and he himself might not remember. I'd love to know that kind of stuff. But Danielson works on the midsection, the back and the stomach with that great top rope gut buster, such a cool move. And I felt like they built well to the near falls in the first fall, and I felt like they had near falls worthy of the end of a match just to end their first near fall. And something I thought of watching this match was a quote I referenced a few times on this podcast, where Samoa Joe on one interview had this theory of wrestling where wrestling matches should only go up or stay at their current level. They should never dip down. So in terms of excitement, intensity, whatever, you should either stay where you are or raise it up a level and then stay at that level till you're ready to raise it again. You should never go back down. I think that worked. That's a good philosophy for many matches. I don't think that's a good philosophy for all matches, and certainly not a 76-minute match.
Or any 2 out of 3 falls match, honestly.
Yeah, and I think a smart thing they do in this match is they find reasons to calm it back down. Obviously, having the breaks between falls helps a little bit, but also like after the first fall, Danielson, where they were doing these big time end of match like near fall trades, and it feels like this is the end, and it's really exciting. They go back to Danielson doing the leg stuff, which you mentioned is one of the highlights of the match and really inventive, but it's not high impact like crowd's really probably going to think this is a finish kind of stuff. But it makes sense because the idea to me at the time, and I think Gabe kind of played up initially as this, was the idea. I thought Gabe did a great moment in that commentary where he directly tied this match to the London match, where he said, like you mentioned, Danielson did the same thing in the Paul London match. He loses the first fall and then he starts going after the leg. And so it makes sense that Danielson is changing his strategy, because whole first fall, he works on the midsection. He still lost the fall. Now he's changing and he's going to the leg. And then later on in that second fall, when Aries hurts himself by elbowing the ring post, he changes his strategy again to the arm, and then he finally wins. So I like the kind of story that they had crafted, whether it's just in my head or how intentional. The story the story they made near the end of the third fall, where Danielson has in the bear hug, was, Danielson had worked over all these different body parts all along to set up for this, because now Aries can't put his feet down in the Boston Crab because he hurt his feet, and his ribs are hurt because he worked over his ribs and stuff. To me, the story I had kind of built in my head, which I liked more, was, and I thought was more believable, was the idea that Danielson had to keep changing things in the first two falls because he wasn't winning. Like, whole first fall, his plan didn't work. He lost the fall. Second fall, the leg thing, it's not really still getting him a win. So when the arm presents itself, and so he kind of just keeps shifting till he finds a way to put this guy down. Another thing I really liked was that they gave Aries, who wins the whole match, the first fall, because so many 2 out of 3 falls match tip off the match because they have whoever wins the match full lose the first fall, because that's the most dramatic way to do the match. You have the guy come from a 1-0 deficit and win. But the problem is because that is the most naturally dramatic way to do that match, so many 2 out of 3 falls matches do that. So I really actually thought it was a clever idea where they didn't do it the most predictable way, even if that would have been a little more dramatic. Aries does not battle from a 0-1 deficit. He wins the first fall, he loses the second, he wins the match still. So I like that. And then we get into the second fall. I actually did like the Danielson crash and burn spot. I like the drama. I like the difference. And I thought it was another smart way they worked a break and a downshift in intensity into the match had a reason for doing that. I can understand people who really didn't like that. And also, I sometimes read reviews of matches after I do my review, so it doesn't influence me, but I don't always even read other reviews. I did for this match, and I will say, Matt, you are far from alone. I think a lot of people their biggest complaint of this match was that break in the second fall where Danielson crashes and burns on a dive, and he just spends minutes and minutes, what feels like minutes at least, selling it and with the commentating debating if they should even continue it and what's going on, and Aries getting frustrated. I did not dislike that as much as many people, I guess, seemingly dislike that. Leg stuff was great. I love that kind of leg trap stuff where he turns that Indian Deathlock almost into a sharpshooter when their legs are still tied up. It's so good. Then the final fall, that's when I really started thinking this match should have been short. That's when I started thinking about Prison Meatloaf, Matt, because the whole third fall is like the epic fall where, Danielson hits an elbow smash and they both collapse and sell for a long time. And Aries does the same thing and they both collapse for a long time. And that's where they do most of their callbacks. This is a match where if you watch Survival of the Fittest, they do so many great callbacks to all the major spots of that match. Like you mentioned, the body slams, they repeat. The bear hug into the crazy Boston Crab that finished the match, they repeat. Even at the very start of this match, Danielson goes for a handshake, and Aries tells him, "I'm not going to shake your hand," and he points to his chin, and I think he says something like, "Remember this," because if you remember in the Survival of the Fittest match, Aries had a legit deep cut on his chin in that match. So they do a good job, if you've watched that match, of giving you a bunch of fun. And usually everything they reference, like all those moves, either Aries reverses them this time or he does the move to Danielson. So I thought they did a really fun job of callbacks. And it's in that third fall, though, where it's so epic. And I felt like the crowd wasn't, even though the crowd, they never completely lost them, I just felt like they weren't getting what they deserved in that third fall. And if this match was 45 minutes and they gave them that third, like what you were saying, 5-star fall, those fans, I think, would have been going out of their mind, jumping out of the seats. But because they padded the match, I feel like they exhausted the crowd and kind of hurt what they would have gotten. And yeah, there's so many other things in my notes I could go into, but Matt, I would just say I think the way I would put this match, other than just my simple rating that I said around 4 stars, would be I think this is a match that I appreciate more than like I love. And I think the crowd felt that way too, because if you notice that point in that match where I'm complaining where the fans in the third fall aren't giving them the huge reactions to the near falls, the second the match ends, the crowd gives them like applause and a standing ovation and a cheer that is louder than almost anything they gave during that third fall. It's almost like, again, they appreciate what they did more than what they actually did. Like the idea of, we know you just wrestled a long time. We know this is special. We know how hard this is. And we appreciate it, but maybe moment to moment, we weren't always with you like 110%. And that's kind of the way I feel about this match, where it's like, it's something to be seen. It's a special thing, but it's an accomplishment, but it's not my favorite. If someone said you just have to watch one of these two matches, the Survival of the Fittest final section, which was like 20 minutes, or this, I'm picking Survival of the Fittest. You know.
Yes, I also am. I think that was the better match. Like I said, this match is flawed, but I have to say, I expected to have the reaction you had, which is like, I appreciate it, but I didn't like super love it. But I really found myself captivated by it. I found myself very entertained throughout the match, and I did not see that coming. I did not expect it to be so fun to watch, and it was because of those big moments and because of the innovative stuff. You know, that Indian deathlock that I never saw work like that. The crazy high spot bear hug that I never saw work like that, with the pulling up of the ears. Things like that. I just thought they did so much cool, different stuff, and I thought the execution was so good. Again, I don't think this was a match of the year either. There's just too many good matches that year. But I'd go higher than you. I'd probably go 4.25, maybe even a soft 4.5 for this match. I really enjoyed it a lot. And I was very impressed with what they did. I agree, the crowd probably would have been more up if the match was shorter, but I still think it's an accomplishment that the crowd was as alive as they were at the 70-minute mark. You know what I mean?
I did think it was a great match, and I might be slightly underrating it. Like, your rating might be more appropriate. I think one thing that's kind of factoring into how I'm rating it is I think I did at the end get a little frustrated on their behalf. Just like, I really do feel like they had like a 5-star or close to it match within this match. You know, like the edited version of this would have gotten the bigger reactions and would have left that impact on people. And so it was almost like, maybe I took it out on the match, like it made me a little frustrated when really the match itself was entertaining me.
Well, here's how I think of it. Maybe for them, you know, they both had their share of like incredible matches in their career, right? Maybe for them, the fact that they have a great 70-something minute match and were able to pull it off is more valuable than having the best possible perfect match they could have had on that night. You know, they had so many, they both had 5-star or, you know, maybe, you know, not according to the Observer, but they both had like really top-notch matches multiple times in their careers, multiple times over the next couple of years. Possibly you could even argue they had one a couple months earlier with each other, but they never had another opportunity to do this. And I think the fact that they did it is something that they could hang their hats on, even if it wasn't the best possible match they could have had on that night.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That's something I wanted to actually talk about with you. I'm going to ask you a question in just a sec, but I think like a really good thing about this, a really interesting thing about this match is not every match the goal is to be like the best wrestling match, like get the most stars, quote unquote, or whatever. And I feel like, especially when you read the background to the match and everything like that, like, the goal of this match wasn't, I don't think, to be the best match possible. It was, it was in that sense, but it wasn't to be the best match these two could ever do, because they would have probably done a 45-minute match. The goal was to do the best super long match they could do, because the idea was that a long, super long match would get attention and sell DVDs and all that. And I do think, and I'm going to put it to you, I don't think this match, if they'd done the 45-minute match I'm talking about, and they'd gotten like a bunch of 4.75 stars and whatever ratings and all that stuff, instead of some of the lower ratings we're seeing, I don't think it would be remembered as much or have sold as many DVDs or have gotten as much attention. I think the selling point wasn't even the quality of this match. Like when people talk about this show, I remember they weren't going, oh, that's the show with the great Danielson Aries match. That's the show with the 76-minute match. Like, do you agree? Like, if this match was technically better but shorter, do you think it would have gotten as much attention?
No, it was a gimmick, but that's fine. It's wrestling.
Yeah.
You know, like you got to sell, like every DVD's got to be unique. They made this DVD unique. Look, when was the last time we talked about a match for this long? You know what I mean? Like even now, 16 years later, we're still giving this match its due because it was so long, because it's the longest match in Danielson's career. It might still be the longest match in ROH history. I'm not 100% positive about that, but I think so. One of the longest singles matches I've ever watched, maybe the second longest singles match I've ever watched. I don't know, because I did watch that Punk and Hero match. But yeah, I mean, no, I think that they made the right call, and maybe it would have even been even better if they did the 3-hour match. But who the hell knows what that would have been like?
And that's another reason I feel kind of guilty for my rating, because I mean, I believe reviews should be a personal reflection of what each individual person thinks of whatever they're reviewing. But if you're a kind of person that thinks the match should do what it set out to do, I think this match is perfect, because I think it did exactly what especially what Danielson set out to do, which is to get people talking, to, be a very good version of a super long match, and to get Aries over. I think it accomplished everything. Like what you just said. Look how long we're doing the review of the show. Look how I have so many quotes from all the newsletters and news sources talking about this match and what went into it behind it. Danielson, all those years after it, still thought to specially talk about it in his book. Like, there are so many great matches he had or great Ring of Honor matches, period, that did not get this much coverage and this much examination and this much thought. And so in that sense, like, who cares what I almost feel like who cares what I think about this as a wrestling match? Like,
it's an important match. Yeah.
Yeah, it is exactly what it needed to be. It accomplished everything they wanted from it.
When we do our 2004 year in review, this will not be in my top 3 matches of the year. Right? I can already think of 3 matches that I would put ahead of it, right? I'd put the Survival of the Fittest match between these two ahead of it. I would put the first Joe Punk match ahead of it. I would put Joe against Jay Briscoe ahead of it. That's just off the top of my head. Yeah. And there's way more great matches to come this year. So it's not that. But if you are a fan of this era of ROH, if you're a fan of Bryan Danielson, if you're a fan of Austin Aries, if you're curious about indie wrestling at this time, I think this is a match you got to see, and I think you'll be able to keep your attention for the entire time without fast forwarding. In my opinion, I was.
Yeah. And that's another thing, which is there's going to be what I said earlier about there's also a talk to have about long matches. Everyone has a different limit for how long they think a wrestling match should be. I know people that have no limit. I know people that say they don't even like 60-minute matches. I know people that I've seen people over the years that do not like 30-minute matches. I follow message boards for a side income, and I've seen people on wrestling message boards say that match was too long for TV, and I've looked up the match time and it was 12 minutes. So everyone has a different, and again, that just comes down to personal taste.
Yeah, I consider myself more of a no-limit soldier.
But I do think there are going to be some people, doesn't matter how good this match is, it's just not going to be their thing. I do think, going to what you said, if you were ever to like a 76-minute match, I think this is going to be if you don't like this match to some level, you're probably not going to like any 76-minute match, because I do think they do a good job.
Yeah, all those other 76-minute matches, you probably won't like any of them.
I mean, Trevor Lee did, I think, over an hour and a half in the last few years on the indies, but I think he had more bells and whistles. Like, that's the other thing. This match doesn't have run-ins. It doesn't have plunder. It's just wrestling. The only thing you could even call a gimmick would be, I guess, the crash and burn section, which basically gives them a few minutes to time out. But there is other matches that have gone long over the years have had props to help pad it out, and these guys had nothing but themselves.
That's right.
Which again, another huge feather in their caps. And I felt like Danielson I felt like Aries deserves huge credit for keeping up with Danielson after barely having any advance warning they were going to go this long. But I feel like Danielson was the star of the show. He just seemed so comfortable doing this. Like, I think he was like 23 or something at this point. Like, it is crazy to think he was that young. And he was like, yeah, I'm willing to try and wrestle for 2 hours and 45 minutes, and he wrestles for 76, and he feels completely at ease.
I don't even think he was 23 yet.
He might have been 22 or something. I mean, he's 38 now, right? So it would depend on when his birthday fell, but
I think he was born in 81 and late in the year, but I'm going to double check that.
Okay.
Just because now I'm curious. May. You're right. So he was 30. He was 23. He was born in May. Yeah.
So still, technically, I would say that's the end of his early 20s. And, Aries is actually a few years older than him. But, Danielson comes off as the complete, Aries comes off as the rookie who's trying to earn his way. Danielson comes off as just,
a veteran. Yeah.
And we've talked about this with Danielson before, but especially in this match, there is not one moment in this match where Danielson comes off as unsure of himself or struggling to figure out what to do.
In my review of the epic encounter match that we did, way back when, I don't even know how long ago it was now. But I actually said that as far as like in the ring, as far as executing moves, as far as like being psychologically sound, when Danielson was 22 at that time, 21, I guess he was. He did not need to get any better than he was already. Like, he was already as good as he ever needed to be. He did get better, and he got better at other things, but he was already that good at that age. And like that still holds true. He's one of the few guys in the world that can do a match like this and have it come off as well as it did. And, I don't even know, given all the injuries and stuff, I don't even know if he could do that now. Maybe he's listening and he'll consider that a challenge. But, I don't even, he was just so freaking awesome. I've said it, too many times on this show to count, but he was.
Yeah, I mean, if Danielson gets mad at this show, one, I doubt he's listening to it. But, if he does, I mean, there should be no wrestler in the company should be less angry at us because we have done, we are two of the bigger Bryan Danielson fans out there, and we have, just loved on that guy up the wazoo, Matt.
And we haven't even gotten up to his top run yet.
but I would say about Danielson too, expanding on your point, I would argue he was probably one of the greatest wrestlers in the world, maybe 1 to 2 years in his career, and then kept that up for probably a good 10 to 15 years. Who else can say that?
He even got back to that level back, when he was doing his heel title run in WWE last year. He was able to get back to that point for a little while. That's pretty remarkable in and of itself.
Yeah, and this is such an, especially when the story behind this match, it is just such, and again, keep in context how young he was, how early in his career he was. It is just an incredible achievement what he did here. Couple of little funny notes. Let me just see. Did you probably mentioned this in the recap, but I remember that top rope elbow from Aries to the floor. Even that's the kind of thing you wouldn't expect to see that in a 76-minute match. 76 matches, you think, okay, you'll save the big spots for the last 5 minutes. The fact that they were willing to do stuff like that in the middle of the match, it's just crazy.
Yeah, they pulled out all the stops for this one, for sure.
You mentioned that I thought you were a gentleman. Oh, yeah, I love this moment on commentary. Now, I want to mention, I thought commentary was very good. I think sometimes Gaze falls in the trap of he'll just reel off 18 moments in Ring of Honor history and it just kind of numbs you. But I think he did a great job with that second fall where he really said this is just like the Paul London Danielson match. I thought that was a great example of Gabe at his best, where he picked one match and one moment and he tied it in and made it make sense, and he didn't overwhelm you with it. I thought Punk was a really interesting choice, the way it worked out, to have him commentate on this.
Yeah, I feel bad for Mark Nolte because he was so excited about this match, and now he didn't get to commentate it.
Yeah, clearly, if you listen to the last few watch the last few Ring of Honor shows, every time this match was referenced, Mark Nolte is clearly like in love with the first match these two had, and so it is kind of a sad thing that he doesn't get to commentate it. But I did think it was cool, like Punk is giving his perspective as one of the only guys who could from this era, who's like, yeah, I've wrestled this long and longer, so I can speak to the psychology behind a long match. So I thought commentary overall was very good for this match. I will say there is a moment in this match where, let's see if I can find it, where Gabe says fans are going to remember this match for a long time, and they're going to talk about it for even longer. So I remember saying to you, Matt, so I guess they're going to forget about the match, but then still continue to talk about it.
It's the ramblings of a demented person somewhere in a home somewhere.
And I will say Gabe did lean a little too hard at the end, where he kept saying over and over again that this match that proves that wrestling is a sport. He just kept saying that, and I felt like you're leaning a little too heavy on that line.
At least he didn't. At least he didn't say multiple times, "They're testing the limits." Because I would have probably.
But I did think overall this was one of a really actually good commentary performance from both men. I thought they did a really good job on this one.
Gabe gets a bad rap for commentary, and we certainly give him hell a lot of the time. But he definitely was good in his way. Like, he definitely had his qualities as a commentator.
I think, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, although that would be a rare occurrence, but like I think we have fun pointing out like the foibles of Gabe on commentary, but I do think our general lesson on rewatching these has been he is not nearly as bad as his rep was, and not as bad as when you compare him to the earliest days of Ring of Honor commentary before he felt like he had to take the reins. I mean, 100 times better than what we were getting.
We've heard several announcers on these shows that were clearly worse than him so far.
Yes, he is not the bottom three even so far.
I would say even not even just that. Like, it's even higher than that.
Yeah. There was one moment in the match, if you're looking for flaws, where Aries uses an illegal fish hook for a submission, and Ref Hansen doesn't seem to know it's illegal, and instead just keeps asking Danielson if he gives up. And the refs even the commentators even call out Ref Hansen on that. I guess another neat little thing we should point out is they actually changed refs for each fall. First fall was Ref Hansen, second fall was Todd Sinclair, and third fall was back to Ref Hansen again. So
yeah, that's right.
Which was a neat way to put over the length of the match. It'll probably give those guys a legit break.
Yeah, it's a legitimately good idea.
Yeah, and one other thing is I noticed one fan in the crowd, when Aries kicked Danielson really hard in the ribs at one point, a fan screamed out, "Dangerous!" So I love that the DVDs had come out enough that Gabe saying "dangerous" had filtered to becoming a meme to the fans.
That's right. It was totally over. It was that generation's "oh my god."
So finally, some thoughts from people in the wrestling media after the fact. I just got a few of them. We'll go to first, how about the PW Torch itself and Gabe himself, who Ring of Honor booker Gabe Sapolsky commented on the Bryan Danielson Austin Aries 80-minute match in the Ring of Honor wrestling forum. So I guess the Torch is it's really the forums exclusive. But Gabe wrote, "There are too many things that were great in this match to list, and I don't want to spoil it for you," he says. "Is this match for everyone? Probably not. But that's okay, because real art isn't for everyone. I'll just sum up by saying it was just brilliant, and a huge thank you to Bryan and Austin." So,
by the way, like, that sounds like hyperbole, but I actually think that's fair. I would call this match art, like, as far as wrestling matches go. It definitely had artistic qualities to it.
Well, also, especially if you think of art as people taking a risk and taking a chance and doing something kind of audacious, this was art in a way most matches aren't, because it was guys taking a risk and at least trying to do something they weren't sure they could pull off. And in a way, they didn't pull it off because they didn't do the original plan, but they still did something that pretty much no one else of their generation has done except a couple guys.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah. Next up, we got The Observer, and Dave's thoughts on this match kind of trickled out from live reports and things, because in one of the initial Observers, Dave first did that star rating he got from the live crowd, 3 3/4 to 4, whatever. Then he does here in one issue, he goes, "I haven't seen it yet, but I'm told that the on videotape version of the Danielson versus Aries 75-minute match that is a match worth going out of your way to see as a classic is that it's far better on tape than it was live, and I could see that being true.
Yeah.
And then later, Dave finally does get to see it, and he writes, I saw the August 7th Ring of Honor Philadelphia show with the Danielson versus Aries 75-minute match. It's something to see if you are into long matches, because there haven't been a lot of matches that long in the past 25 years. It wasn't as if the crowd was going nuts as they were during the last 15 minutes of the 60-minute CM Punk versus Samoa Joe match, or for other long matches in Ring of Honor. They were quiet. You could see that they were into it, and when it was over, gave a big standing ovation. It made logical sense and was paced well, but it's really only for a specialized audience, as a more casual crowd wouldn't have the patience for it. You can't help but be impressed with the effort, particularly in doing so many top rope moves with the low ceiling, causing them to have to modify some moves like superplexes. And it's not like they shied away from them. I'd probably go 3.5 stars for it, but I watched with some friends who were casual fans after SmackDown, and they liked it in spots, but overall it couldn't capture their attention. So that's Dave's review. And see, you thought I was maybe a little low on 4 stars. Dave gave it 3.5.
No, I remembered that, but that's what when I saw it, I was surprised by how much I liked it.
Yeah.
Just based on some of those, less than rave reviews.
And
when I talk about what I was impressed with from the match, would the thing that you would know would be like, oh yeah, they did all these top rope moves with that low ceiling. Like, would that be the thing that really stuck out to you? It definitely wouldn't be for me.
No, I think if you listen to our review, that's far from our emphasis on this match. Mike Johnson wrote, let me see what Mike Johnson wrote. He said, the fans were chanting match of the year when it was over. I wouldn't go that far, but the effort that both put out there was simply incredible. This is a match that was decent live, but once you get a chance to sit there on video and pay close attention, will come off so much better. I don't think anyone who came to see good wrestling was going to complain, although I really would have liked to see how the longer match would have gotten over with the crowd and what they would have pulled out of their bag of tricks. Perhaps Ring of Honor can go with an empty arena match, and they will get the chance down the line. So Mike Johnson also predicting the future of COVID-19.
But it's interesting, like, with WWE doing all these experiments, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to have these shows anyway, you might as well try something crazy like that, right?
If you said, okay, Daniel Bryan, let's do a 3-hour match or whatever, and he had to be with someone in WWE, who would you pick? Who do you think could do it with him?
Oh, gosh. You're really putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
That's Drew Gulak.
Sami Zayn?
Sami Zayn, in many cases I would have said yes. I don't. Is he too banged up to handle that right now?
Maybe. I mean, if we're just going for recent opponents, Cesaro maybe? If we're allowed to go into...
Oh, yeah, Cesaro would probably be a really good choice, honestly.
If we're allowed to go into NXT, I mean, we know guys like Adam Cole,
Roderick Strong,
Gargano, and Ciampa can do long matches, although I wouldn't want all the theatrics they've had in some of their recent matches.
I mean, but we know that Danielson and Roderick Strong have good chemistry.
And they've done hour-plus match, or right around there. So
right around there.
Yeah, so in terms of guys that have proved... So yeah, I think...
Andrade, I don't know how many long matches he's done, but he did definitely a pretty long one against Gargano.
And of course, The Undertaker, I think he could definitely go 2 hours, 45 minutes.
A 3-hour boneyard match.
Oh, God. So yeah, the show ends. Another interesting twist is because the match was so long, this is pushing it right up against 3 hours. The show ends with the crowd giving a round of applause. Aries goes to the back without getting a handshake. The house lights actually come on. They actually show us this. Then Danielson eventually makes his way to his feet. The crowd chants "thank you" and fade to black. So most shows end on a series of behind the scenes promos or at least some kind of big angle. And this is just kind of, you just see the natural aftermath of the match and you're just kind of left to sit with it. And that's the way the show ends.
It's the right way to end it, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that's the show. That's testing the limit. And
it tested our limit.
Yeah, I think both of us are starting to lose our voices a little bit. I can definitely hear mine. Matt, it's always weird when you review a show where one match is such a big chunk of it, because it's almost like sometimes it feels like whatever you think of that match is basically what you think of the show. I mean, this match, we include the post-match, the entrances and stuff, was almost half the show. So, but what do you think about the show as a whole, given that half the show was what we just talked about?
Well, you think of a lot of shows as one-match shows. There are actually a lot of ROH shows in 2004 where you just remember one match. So I went into this kind of just thinking, well, I don't care about anything else on the show. But I have to say, the show as a whole, like the non-Danielson Aries stuff, was pretty good. Like, it was pretty entertaining. The undercard matches were fast-paced and fun. Scorpio's appearance, what to me was a pleasant surprise. The Rottweilers versus Briscoes was a good match. The only thing that I really didn't like that much was the tag title match. And the main event I thought was fantastic and super memorable. So I thought this was another winner for ROH. I thought that this another in the streak of just like very good shows that they put on. And I would actually say, you know, even though there was only one like really memorable match, I would say from top to bottom, this card was entertaining, and it did have the great match to put it over the top. So solid thumbs up for me.
Me too. I would, the way I would put it is, the undercard is not good enough to go buy the show for the undercard, but it's good enough to, if you're buying the show for Danielson Aries, it's good enough to watch the undercard too. Like, don't skip ahead to the main event unless you're really pressed for time. But if you're watching a 76-minute match during a pandemic, I'm going to guess you're not pressed for time. So it's worth watching the whole show. The whole show is good enough to warrant a watch, but obviously the selling point is, and I think it's worth everyone, unless you absolutely know right now, if you know you really hate long matches and you just know that in your heart, I don't think this is going to win you over. But if you've ever thought you might like a 76-minute match, I think it's worth at least trying it, because it's just such a rare thing in modern wrestling. You know, there's only been a few examples of matches this long or longer that, you know, you should give it a try, I think.
Definitely agreed. I can't imagine somebody enjoying this era of ROH not enjoying this match. You might not think it's like the best thing you ever saw, or like French toast #3 or anything, but you will appreciate what they did here, and I think it'll hold your attention.
So, that brings us to the end of the show. So for plugs, you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Trevor Dame. I'm spelled D-A-M as in Mother E. Sometimes people think Dane because they sound the same. At Mayor MGF for Matt. ThROH The Years at gmail.com is our email address. That's THROH for through. We have on the plugs forum, on the Pro Wrestling Only forum, we have a thread for the show. And again, just a reminder that we've done a ton of podcasts recently where Matt and I were on the 5-Star Match Game with Joe Gagney, who you may be seeing hearing on our show soon in the future. I'm on Who's Next for the next, already for 1 episode, on for 3 more. Matt's done other shows with the Pro Wrestling Super Show with Stephen Graham in recent months that you should go listen. Matt's original show, List 'em and Learn. Like, if you're looking for podcasts, and we've done 3 in the last less than a month, there's plenty of us to listen to go back and listen to. If you need more company during this trying time, we're here for you. And the next show we will be covering is, and of course my dumb Patreon, www.patreon.com/mecca, M-E-C-C-A. Do that twice in a row. It's stupid. You probably don't want to spend money on it. That's my plug. Until next time, we will be covering on our next show Scramble Cage Melee, which is a show that has a giant scramble cage match with a million high flyers where you have to dive off the cage to eliminate somebody else. So it should be crazy. It also has Homicide versus Samoa Joe versus CM Punk in a rare big-time ROH 3-way where the winner gets the rights to be the icon of Ring of Honor, an honor so prestigious that no one remembers it ever happened. So
we'll remember after next time.
Yes, we will remember at least for a few weeks, maybe after the next time. Matt, do you have anything else to say in these troubled times?
No, I'm having a lot of fun, banging these shows out though, and I'm looking forward to watching the next one. I'm going to get on that ASAP. I'm looking forward to getting to some of these big events in the fall of 2004. Living as though I am in 2004. That way I can be disappointed by George W. Bush getting reelected all over again.
I am going to now have to run to a grocery store before it closes in half an hour, and hope I don't die.
We'll have a good time and have a great time when you're there.
Yeah, and wash your hands. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.